So this is going to be a fantastic period here for us here on COP26. And my name is Katarina Rolfsdotter Jansson. I am host for We Don't Have Time. And with me next to me here I have my co-host Nick Nuttall. Lovely to get things started, Nick, isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic, and it's nice to see this audience here in front of us as well. We're hoping these are going to be great shows this week, shows that will basically illuminate the action that's actually happening on climate change across the world. And even if there's some pessimism in the audience, I think we'll actually see that there really is some genuine change.
And we are live here at the Nordic Pavilion at COP26. And you can follow us on various channels and also share this with other viewers. Our food production system makes up a huge part of the world's CO2 emissions. And at the same time, nature itself is also a very strong solution to getting these emissions down. So we're going to talk today about these enormous challenges and also the possibilities in this field, and how we can scale the nature-based solutions. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Anita Soina, who is with us here from Kenya. And Anita Soina is our Green Zone reporter. Lovely to have you with us, Anita. And Anita, you will be sort of seeing what's happening outside of the diplomatic zone.
Yeah.
So leading up to this, what events do you look forward to the most here during COP26?
I'm looking forward to the events on 4th and on the 5th. On 4th we'll be having the events on energy, knowing that our country, Kenya, is among the top countries that are on renewables, and still is the same country that has set money aside on their recent budget for coal plants, and also the event on 5th about youth engagements. Yeah.
So far, what has happened outside of this? Now we're in the diplomatic zone. What have you picked up on your way to Glasgow, and also sort of outside? Any protests, anything you've noticed that's been going on?
Oh yeah, yesterday and today we had a protest by the Ugandan delegates. They were trying to call out their president. I really didn't catch why, because there was so much commotion and we were sent away from the place. But I saw them raising the Ugandan flag and trying to speak to their president. Sadly, I'm sure he didn't see that. Yeah.
So Anita, there's been a lot of discussions here prior to the COP about representation maybe not being able to, representatives coming from, for instance, from Africa, from South America, and also from the Southeast. What do you have to say about this from your perspective?
I'd say compared to the previous COPs, this time we've had a better representation, but we are not yet there. That's for MAPA, most affected people in areas, Global South. But the issue, I've been interacting with people from the Global South and people from the affected areas in the South America, and their issue is actually about, even if they are represented, will there be action? Because we could be talking about representation every day. We could bring the whole of Africa here, the whole of South America here, but are there action, tangible action that are going to promise us that for sure that there's going to be change, and this is the last COP of too much talks and the first COP of tangible discussions? That's where the conversation is.
I couldn't agree with you more. Well, thank you very much, Anita Sonia. You'll be back every day in our broadcast.
Yes, sure.
So, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So, Nick Nuttall, please talk a little bit to the audience here, present here in the pavilion and also online, about the COP program and the expectations.
Well, the expectation of our program is quite simple, as I said before, to demonstrate real determined action by businesses, by cities, by organizations like the United Nations. We're very pleased to have Ibrahim Thiaw here this evening from the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. We want to see that people are really moving and are walking the talk on this. And while some people may be a little pessimistic about possibly the outcome of this particular COP, the fact that we have momentum underway is absolutely vital, and that's what we're going to demonstrate throughout the next 2 weeks.
All about?
Yeah, well, normally when we do our shows, we have a counter that shows how long it is before we have to halve our greenhouse gas emissions to meet the Paris Climate Change Agreement. But we're actually supporting our friends at another UN agency, the UN Development Programme, with a really fun campaign involving also this person, which is about fossil fuel subsidies. So this is how much has been spent on fossil fuel subsidies since we actually open this COP here in Glasgow. And it's eye-watering, isn't it? Eye-watering. Yeah.
So let's watch this video that introduces our friend here and the impact of what our actions can have if we don't avoid choosing extinction.
You okay? You need a minute? Cool. Okay. Listen up, people. I know a thing or two about extinction. And let me tell you, and you'd kind of think this would be obvious, going extinct is a bad thing. And driving yourselves extinct? In 70 million years, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. At least we had an asteroid. What's your excuse? You're headed for a climate disaster, and yet every year governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now. Think of all the other things you could do with that money. Around the world, people are living in poverty. Don't you think helping them would make more sense than, I don't know, paying for the demise of your entire species? Let me be real for a second. You've got a huge opportunity right now. As you rebuild your economies and bounce back from this pandemic, this is humanity's big chance. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes. Thank you.
So now I have the great pleasure of introducing Ibrahim Thiaw, who is the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and also the Executive Secretary of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. Ibrahim has 40 years of experience in sustainable development, environmental governance and natural resource management. I can't list all his achievements. He's a Mauritanian national, which is fantastic. And we got to know each other when he was Deputy Executive Director of the UN Environment Programme in Nairobi. He's had a very glittering career. We know today's show is about food. It's about food production, but it's also about nature-based solutions. It's about how we use our land or how we abuse our land. And in fact, there's nobody better to talk about this than Ibrahim. Ibrahim, give me one clue into, firstly, what have you been doing today and how does it contribute to this agenda?
Well, I dedicated to land restoration in Africa, in particular the Great Green Wall in the Sahel. Co-organized by the Prince of Wales, President Macron, and President Ghazouani of Mauritania on behalf of 11 countries in Africa that have come together to join forces to combat desertification. It was a great meeting, but the highlight of it is that Jeff Bezos, who was at the meeting, made a big announcement to invest $1 billion for landscape restoration in Africa. I think we need that magnitude of funding. So Jeff Bezos' commitment will come together with another commitment made by 8 financial institutions. So in total now we have $20 billion committed for land restoration in the Sahel from 2021 to 2025.
Some people aren't aware of the magnitude of what damage is out there. So could you maybe capture what's happening with land right now in terms of degradation?
the air we breathe. Simply, land is the fashion, clothes that we wear. Everything is coming from land. Without land, we don't exist.
Yeah.
And land is providing us with 95% of our food. So if we degrade land, what we are doing is actually depleting the capital, the very capital of ours.
Yeah.
So far, 3 out of 4 hectares in the world have already been altered by human activities, all as free land. So if this trend continues, by 2050, only 10% of Earth will be left without ugly scars created by us as human beings. So we have to be very careful about how we manage land, how we produce, and how we consume. It comes back to these 2 words, production and consumption.
We just explored this topic. I mean, it's absolutely clear that a lot of this land that's degraded has lost a lot of its carbon, so it's a double benefit, isn't it? We can help a big time with the climate change challenge.
Absolutely. When you degrade land, what you do, you actually emit carbon. Because this climate change, the main sources of the climate change are energy and land use.
Yeah.
So when you degrade land, you actually contribute to emitting carbon.
Yeah.
But there's good news in all of this, is that please restore land. Because when you restore land, you suck that carbon back to the soil where it belongs.
Yeah.
It should have never been emitted. So by restoring land, not only you combat climate change, but you also provide food, you create income for communities, you create clean water for communities, you actually restore biodiversity. So it's a win-win-win situation. So this is why I think many people in the world are now of the understanding that land restoration is not only the cheapest solution to climate change, but it is also the easiest, because you don't need a PhD to do land restoration.
Yeah.
Any farmer, any person in the world can do land restoration.
Yeah.
So it is not as complicated as the carbon capture and storage, which requires a lot of technology and for which we don't have yet enough knowledge.
It's natural,
natural.
Carbon capture and storage, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it is
that's
natural.
what it is, yeah.
Yeah.
One last thing before I ask you to say, I know you have another meeting to go to, but one last thing. I know you're from Mauritania, and you want to tell me a fascinating story, that a country like Mauritania actually produces pretty much enough food to feed everybody in that country, but the food happens to grow at a very discrete moment in time, and you can't put it into the markets because it would just down the prices. You can't even get it to some markets. It's a fascinating thing. That's another side. I know it's not a land degradation story, but it's a food story, is it not?
It is connected to land.
Aha.
What is happening is that food production is seasonal there.
Yeah.
Because due to climate, when you have 50 degrees Celsius, you cannot produce food.
Yeah.
So food is seasonal, and more importantly, they cannot store their food because there is lack of energy. It's an energy poor region. It's not only Mauritania, it's the Sahel in general. So what is it for a farmer to produce food just to lose half of it post-harvest because they could not store it, because they could not have access to market? So when we say Great Green Wall or land restoration, we talk about food waste and food loss.
Yeah.
And food loss is a big issue in developing countries because they cannot store their food. So, and yet, the energy that is destroying that food is essentially the sun. And sun can be harnessed to actually store the food.
Yeah.
So create a transformative relationship that you have with nature and make sure that whenever you have wind and energy, you can actually use it to store food. When you store that much food, you reduce actually food aid. What's the point of aiding or helping people to eat if they can produce, help them to actually conserve, help them to have access to market, help them create value chains, and help them transform their economy in a way that they can actually produce, and the production will be worth doing for many farmers. Then they will not migrate. Then they will not go to cities, and then they will not create these insecurity challenges that we are facing. Then farmers and pastoralists will not fight for access to land and water, which is one of the sources of insecurity in the world.
Ibrahim, it's been a great pleasure to have you. Congratulations with this Jeff Bezos investment.
Thank you.
And we look forward to seeing you again on the show with less technical hiccups and even more land restored.
Thank
okay,
you.
thank you, Ibrahim. Bye. Right. Our next speaker is Marc Buckley, a man of many titles. He's a sustainability advisor, consultant, advocate for the Sustainable Development Goals, many other things, a futurist, a social entrepreneur, the list goes on. Marc, you want to reform agriculture.
I do.
And the food and the beverage industry and the impactful or the bad impacts they're making. And you want to, as it say, moonshot companies to do something really very, very different. So tell us about it. What can you do? What can we do to help this moonshot?
There's a lot to tell. So we are at a pivotal moment similar to the moonshot.
Yeah.
So when John F. Kennedy spoke to Congress, he said, before this decade is out, we will put a man on the moon. We're at that same position with the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. We have 9 years left to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement. And the funny thing is, most people don't know that not only is that a moonshot, it's the world's first ever Earth shot, and it's a moment of historical precedence. There is no other time in human history that 197 countries came together for the first time ever and agreed on a roadmap, a plan of action to 1.5 degrees of warming and 17 sustainable development goals. Targets, indicators, actions that we can take to get there. The Sustainable Development Goals, all 17, are tied to agriculture, seafood, food and beverages, to food, to our food resources, how we produce, how we transport, how we consume. And most of you, I hope, also eat 3 times a day or maybe once a day or at least once in your life because it is the most vital energy source on Earth, period. Not fossil fuels, not hydrogen, carbon, carbon capture. It is food, a caloric intake. A calorie is a measurement of energy that regulates our body temperature and is the most vital thing. For many years, we thought that the oil, coal, and gas, the fossil fuel industry, the transport, the telco industry, that was the biggest cause of human suffering and greenhouse gas emissions? Absolutely not. The biggest industry that touches every human being on Earth, human suffering, human health, and greenhouse gas emissions is the agriculture, seafood, and beverage industries and how we produce and consume food. And so it's the biggest pivotal moonshot moment in history that we have. 9 years left to really fix it. And so I say global food reformist. I think the entire food system needs to be reformed, not only off of fossil fuels, but done in a much different way out of what I call the dark ages, actually.
Well, it's a very complicated area, food and farming and all these other areas. Can you maybe put your finger on something where you think reform has to happen now and could make a big difference?
I actually cannot, because that's something that we've tried in the past. In 2018, all international organizations, United Nations, World Trade Organization, World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, all switched to a systems view approach to life, systemic thinking, dynamic modeling to solve our global grand challenges. Human suffering, greenhouse gas emissions, and our global grand challenges. And so if we pick just one area, that's only one facet of the problem. We focus all our time and energy in that one facet, we might be able to tickle or scratch the surface at doing something there, but we're neglecting this entire system that we really need to change. We need global food systems reform, and in the past 3 years we've really seen more movement than ever before in our world's history with the UN Food Systems Summit. We've seen a lot of action through the Eat Lancet report for food. The talk is about food because it's something that each and one of us can have an impact on and do something each and every day.
Absolutely.
I think getting away from animal agriculture and meat is a big step. But I think even bigger than that, it's not so much the consumer's responsibility, it's the producer's responsibility to change the way that they produce food that will really stop human suffering and solve our global grand challenges.
Well, that's a fantastic segue into our next speaker. So, Marc, thank you very much for being with us.
You're most welcome.
Really good to see you.
Thank you
very much indeed. Right, Ingmar, carbon. Tell us about the We Don't Have Time app. We need to get some interest in this here?
Yes.
Are you on full power there with the...
I'm on full power.
Okay.
So the We Don't Have Time app, it's all about sharing solutions. If you see something that is good regarding the climate, you can give them climate love. And if you see something that is bad regarding the climate, you could give them a climate warning. So this is a review platform where you can hold the leaders accountable. And one example here is that if we want this counter to turn to zero, we could give every leader that are giving those fossil fuel sponsoring criticism, and we can call them out. But on the other hand, if we see someone working on solution, we can give them love and call them out. And you can also ask questions to the speakers in the app. So it's a perfect place to have a climate dialogue and change the world.
Absolutely. Okay, brilliant. Okay. Right, we're now going to look at transformers in the food systems. Maybe we have some transformers in the food systems. I wondered if we had the wonderful Owen Bethell. You're Owen Bethell. Fantastic, Owen. It's so nice to see somebody this evening. There's only 25,000 people at this COP, but we seem to have lost everybody. So it's good to get you on board. Owen is the Senior Manager, Environmental Impact Global Public Affairs at Nestlé. And Owen manages Nestlé's, come on board, Owen, come on this side, it's nice and warm on that side. Owen manages Nestlé's global climate change, nature and water-related advocacy, communications and also engagement activities. He's also responsible for topics related to animal welfare within the public affairs and ESG team. Many, many other things that you're working on, Owen, but very nice to see you indeed. We talked about food just before with Marc. It's the most critical issue in a sense of the moment, he believes, and I probably don't disagree. So give us your perspective. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much for welcoming me to this event, and thanks to the Exponential Roadmap and to We Don't Have Time for the invitation. I think it's a really important topic, and it's very important to my company, given we're the world's biggest food and beverage company, and we're working hard on reaching net zero emissions. So it's been a big build-up to Glasgow, and it's good to be here at last. One of the things that we are really proud of is our net zero commitment, and I can remember us making it 2 years ago, and that being a really big turning point for our company.
Yes.
And I think in that time we've seen a lot of other companies commit to the same thing. And now we need to see our suppliers move in the same direction, which is what the Exponential Roadmap's all about. And it's what We Don't Have Time is also trying to advocate for. So from the Nestlé perspective, I'd like to highlight a couple of things. First of all, we mapped out our emissions, and we published a net zero roadmap last year. And that shows that our in-scope emissions are around 92 million tons of CO2 equivalent. To give you an idea of scale, that's about twice the annual emissions of Switzerland, the country that we're based in. So you can see that private sector action is essential for this challenge, given we can do 2 times what Switzerland can do if we get this right. We are therefore looking at reducing our emissions by 20% by 2025, by 50% by 2030, and that's the trajectory that we need to see really all countries and companies going on if we're going to stick to the 1.5 degree pathway. The 2 big ways in which we're going to get there are firstly switching to regenerative agriculture in our supply chain. So we've set out an investment of $1.3 billion US to get there, and also ending deforestation associated with commodities that we're purchasing and investing in a forest positive approach. Right. So we're not just looking at planting trees, we're looking at co-benefits, biodiversity, investment for communities, and maintaining and safeguarding water resources as well on the journey. So these are two big chunks of our plan: regen ag, forest positive. But in addition to that, we're doing things like switching to 100% renewable electricity at our 800 global sites by 2025. And we're also looking at offsetting emissions associated with our brands, but not with our corporate side. So our corporate roadmap doesn't rely on offsets, but for our brands who want to communicate to consumers, they can invest in high quality schemes which then deliver that and help them make those sorts of claims.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that we're a big company, but we're still limited in our impact. So we need to see greater ambition and action from countries and also from other companies. And we really need to see this shift to a regenerative food system at scale, which is what we're all about as a company, and that's what we see a lot of our peers and competitors doing as well. I would also like to highlight the critical role of farmers in this transition. So our plan is based on ensuring farmers are rewarded for the practices that they invest in, that there is a just transition which ensures their livelihoods are protected and enhanced as we move to a lower carbon food system, and also that companies like ours pay a premium where that is required for regenerative inputs, so regenerative ingredients, which we then turn into products which we market and sell. I think that's really important because we have this transition period which can be difficult. Mm-hmm. When it comes to food and land use, there needs to be some financial support there, mm-hmm. and technical support as well, mm-hmm. for those making those difficult decisions in the supply chain. So I'm pleased to say the progress is underway. We've got 30 net zero dairy farms already, mm-hmm. that we've invested in. We have coffee programs working in 15 different countries where we're investing in technical support through agronomists, and we're helping coffee be grown in a more climate smart, resilient way, and also in a way that produces fewer carbon emissions. One of the other things we're doing is supporting agripreneurs. So that's farmers who are entrepreneurs, but in the agricultural space. Mm-hmm. So that brings more young people into the industry, which again is a key transition challenge, and helps us ensure that it's fit for the future, a low carbon future for food production. Finally, I'd say that we also support collective action. So we're talking about here multi-stakeholder bodies which are advocating for regenerative agriculture and for forest positive strategies, working alongside competitors and peers on that journey. I think that's really important to send a demand signal to the supply chain that Nestlé and others are serious about this transition and will make it happen at scale. It also means that if you're a farmer, you're not getting multiple different requests from different food companies. You're getting the same kind of requirements, the same kind of standards for ensuring that you provide lower carbon ingredients to companies. Maybe one more point. Yeah, plant-based. Sure. So plant-based is a really big growth area for us as a company, as a food company. That's about providing alternatives to traditional meat or dairy-derived proteins. That's important because they are lower in emissions, but also we need to recognize there's a place for both. So there's a mixture of agricultural systems out there, and I think our plan is about decarbonizing whether you're drinking milk from a cow or milk from an oat or another form of input. Yeah. So we're hoping to see more action on food, more action on nature at COP, and we want to be a big part of that journey.
Thanks very much indeed, and thanks for being with us. We are going to have a panel, but before we do that, we want to actually bring in Olga Grönvall, who's initiator and founder of the non-profit organization Reformaten, and we're hoping that she's going to come in on the magic of Zoom from Stockholm. Is that correct?
So my name is Olga Grönvall Lund, and I am the initiator and founder of Reformaten. And Reformaten, maten in Swedish, that's food. And we are a movement for a positive global food system where it is easy to eat right. We want to speed up a science-based transformation of the food system so it's gonna benefit the health of the human and the planet. And by inviting everyone to this conversation, we have created a platform for political pressure. And 3 years ago, I never thought I would stand here and speak. I was living in Berlin and had a lot of fun and was running a company with my best friend focusing on using the sandwich as a tool for communication. And do we know if it's working? Or am I just speaking? Yeah, okay. So we use the sandwich as a tool for communication and creating events to make sure that people had a fun and enjoyable life. But then I realized the issues with the food system, that it's extremely hard to find good quality ingredients and cook everything from scratch and sell it because our society don't want to pay for food anymore. That sucks. So what happened was that, it was a struggle to run this company. But then I moved back to Stockholm and my dad got very sick in cancer, which led to that I spent a month with him in the hospital and realized how deeply rooted and fucked the food system is. Sorry to say that, but it's true. So right now, like our tax money is feeding food or the food system that is harming the planet and the health of the humans and nature. So then, like the dietist at the hospital, she told me, but this is old system, so we cannot do anything about it. And then I said, bullshit, like we have all the research reports and know that we have to do something about this. But no one is doing anything, so therefore Reformaten came alive. And we are a movement that want to highlight and show people like how extremely important it is that we put this question on top of the agenda. And as food is harming, like the food production, or mainly of the food production, is harming the natural ecosystems, we have to change this extremely fast. So by moving, or like, food is also so fun and tasty. Like the best moments in the life, like for my sake, is when I gather people that I love and cook something from scratch and have an enjoyable moment. So why don't we use like these celebration times and food that comes from healthy ecosystems and soils and make this transformation towards the global sustainability goals fun and for everyone? So the goal of Reformaten is to demand from the political leaders that we need to have like clear targets and ambitious target for a healthy and sustainable food system. But we also want to demand from companies that they take their action and have a transparency when it comes to the value chain. And we cannot only look at the carbon emissions, we also have to look at how the production is affecting the loss of biodiversity, how it is affecting the public health, and also about the social justice. And like when a company just look at how like to lower the carbon emissions, it's easy that they tell you, oh, go vegan, and then someone starts to eat avocado from Mexico where they don't have any groundwater and have issues with that problem. So I think it is super important that we speak about the complexity when it comes to food. And one start would be to follow the FAO report where that is said like a multi-billion-dollar opportunity where we have to take the subsidies that goes to bad farms and give it to those one that is repairing the ecosystems. So that's short about me and Reformaten, and I'm super grateful to be here today and get to speak about this, and I look forward to the program. Yes, thanks.
We want to have the panel discussion with our friend from Nestlé, if he's still here. Yes, is he still here? Owen, yes, can we just get him? And with the wonderful Emelie Öhlander, who is the Climate Action Program Manager at Ericsson. Emelie has had the responsibility for executing the climate strategy and program objectives of the company. She works with Ericsson's own activities, employee engagement, as well as external partners. And I think really interesting is she's going to talk about an initiative that Ericsson is doing, which links to the question of nature-based solutions, which is what it's all about. Come on, Emelie. Now, with the magic of, if you can just go right over there, Emelie, that would be super. And then Owen can come up. Owen, you come up here. If we're really lucky, we might also, through the magic of Zoom, bring in Kay Török, the Chief Sustainability Officer of Max Burgers. Are you with us, Kai? If you are, that's wonderful. If you're not, it's not so wonderful, but that's reality. Wow. And then, through the magic of Zoom, we'd also like to bring in Rebecca Tickell and Joshua Tickell, who are the creators of the Netflix documentary Kiss the Ground, featuring Woody Harrelson. they've really worked very, very hard, as you know, on this whole idea of regenerative agriculture globally. Won many film awards for some absolutely fantastic productions, Kiss the Ground just being one of them. They're also working on a follow-up to that, Kiss the Ground 2. So it's getting a bit like, you know, James Bond or something, isn't it, really? There's going to be Kiss the Ground 3, okay. But it's really good stuff, and I hope you've seen it. I can't hear our other people, so it's going to be you two. I think the first question goes to Emelie, actually, which is very simply, how is Ericsson working on these nature-based solutions? What is the connection between digitalization and the mangroves?
And the mangroves, yeah, thank you so much. Maybe, you know, as a telecommunication company, as Ericsson, maybe you wouldn't think that we work with nature-based solutions, but we've had an initiative now for a few years called Connect the Mangroves, where we actually, through IoT sensors, help local communities in the Philippines and Malaysia to connect all the nature's I would say parameters like salinity, saltwater, heat, like pH level of the water, that actually help the local communities to plant new mangrove saplings into better climate, because sometimes they have floodings, so they won't survive. And through the IoT and the technicalities, you can actually make a higher survival rate for the mangroves. So actually increase the survival rate of 80% now. And this project is continuing, and now we're evolving it, actually also using AI to detect new bird species and also human intrusion into these mangroves. And this is going to be a new part of the WEF initiative as well, 1 Trillion Trees campaign. So we will just release our new pledge towards this initiative.
Wow, okay, that's really cool. We are, in fact, quite lucky to have Török actually on the line, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Max Burgers. Yeah, I mean, Kai's been there since, 2016, always been Chief Sustainability Officer, and I think many people might know that Max, in 2008, the company created the world's first climate-labeled menu and started capturing emissions through reforestation in Africa. And in 2019, Max Burgers received the UN Global Climate Action Award for the world's first climate-positive menu. So, Kai, are you with us?
It's a pleasure.
Great, okay, we're going to have a little panel debate. We've got Owen here from Nestlé. We've got Emelie from Ericsson. Maybe just looking at the two kind of directly food-related companies here for a second. Nestlé, a massive multinational. Max, an up-and-coming, very different kind of burger company. How is this going around, this debate about whether we all go to plant-based or non-plant-based? Owen, you were clear that it wasn't just one thing or the other. It was more about a consumer choice, I think. How does Max sit with this back in Stockholm as a company, Kai?
Well, we know we have to reduce the emissions of our average meal by 75% until 2050. So we need to reduce our emissions 4% every year until then. So that's the basics of it, and of course we know that when we get our guests to move their hand from the classical beef burger to the vegan burger, they might reduce their climate impact with 87% or 90%. Mm-hmm. So it is a dramatically different kind of food impact from that choice. And we've increased the sales of those alternatives, the low climate initiative alternatives, the green menu as we call it, with 10 times the last 5 years. So from 2% of turnover to 20% today.
That's great,
so
Max.
It's happening.
That's great by
happening.
Max. Yeah, that's great by Max. And thank you, Kai. I mean, so from Nestlé's point of view, is it the way we farm or is it the products we produce? Maybe that's a different way of phrasing it. Is it the way we are farming that can reduce the emissions, or is it the food that we are eating as humans?
Yeah, I'd say it's both. So I agree that we need to diversify our diets more and potentially eat less meat and dairy in Western countries. But we're talking about a global challenge here, and there are many emerging economies and developing countries where animal agriculture has a very important role, very central role. And so our approach would be to not rule that out, but improve it and work with farmers to become more sustainable in the production methods. So we would see it as an and solution rather than an or solution.
Yes.
And I think, growing the plant-based market is absolutely something we're committed to as a company, and we're seeing that. We're seeing big growth. But at the same time, I think meat and dairy has such a big role to play from a social perspective, from an economic perspective, and also from a food systems perspective. Integrating animal agriculture into plant-based systems is something that can be advantageous. So I would say more plant-based, but not exclusively, would be the future for the food system.
Emelie, looking at you here with digitalization and mangroves, where do you see the link between food, agriculture, digitalization and mangroves in this topic?
Yeah, I think we can. I would just do it like this so I don't hear myself. Sorry. I think we can just take away the mangroves in this section, but I think digitalization is a way of making everything easier and actually democratize the agricultural system. With that, you can do, it's actually easier for smallholder farmers to do more digital-based solution that can help them in, you can access the market, you can access your crops in a different way. You can maybe use sensor that creates this system that maybe it's easier for them to keep up with as well. And of course, mangroves is a different part. That will be more a part of the climate adaptation side. That of course is also important when we build a resilient climate society.
Yes. But I think sometimes people forget, of course, that mangroves, along with seagrasses and salt marshes, could be absorbing as much as 1/5 of the world's transport emissions. So indeed they are small slivers of ecosystems around the coastline, but in fact they have a really huge role to play in climate. I think
yes, they do, and also there are the nurseries of the fishing. Yes, as you talked about, Owen, as well. It's so much depending in these countries on small scale fishing, agriculture, you have to create those really good biodiversity factors within each country, and then mangroves is a huge part.
Yeah. I was listening to a really interesting program the other day about these new kinds of foods that we have coming through. So plant-based diets, some of the technologies, the link with, say, growing meat from a cell of a previous animal, as it were, or part from an animal, blah, blah, blah. But also some of this 3D printing of steaks and all this other kind of technology coming on. And there was a fascinating observation by one person, I think actually it was in The Economist, it wasn't on the TV show, saying, yes, they may substitute for what had been once animal proteins and probably quite good for animal welfare in some cases, but are they good for people? In other words, they are processed in some way, these foods. So Kai, have you picked up on that debate? What do you think about it?
Can you be more specific about the whole debate of regenerative farming?
No, the whole debate about whether you actually, when you make foods out of proteins to replace animal proteins, for example, or these things like 3D printing of steaks and all kinds of stuff from, say, plant-based proteins, there has been some debate by some people that they may be good for the environment, they may be good for replacing animals, and animal welfare could be better because you're making something out of a protein, as it were. But they are, in a sense, also processed. Are they good for human health? Does that ever come across your radar at Max Burgers?
Yeah, it is a question, and it's a large trend to go for clean eating.
Yeah.
So what is clean eating? How is that healthy? And actually, we really don't know all the details of that. But when we look at what the dietary people say, the specialists, they're looking at the nutrients of this kind of food, and they say it's great. It's basically beans in different varieties that you have refined. So you will have a high protein content. You will get a lot of nutrients in it. So we know beans are good for health. Mm-hmm. And then we can argue about could we produce those kind of foods in a better way. Of course we can, and we will. So I think moving away from as a society, moving away from some of the large-scale farming, monocrops, to more regenerative farming, that's what we're going to see. But it's going to take time.
Yeah, going to take time. And of course, we don't have time. So, Let's kind of wrap it up here a little bit. It's sometimes hard to weave these stories, but I think we have to weave these stories, the connection with digitalization, mangroves, a big food multinational company like Nestlé and all you're doing and the very positive actions you're taking in terms of science-based targets. What a company like Max is doing in Scandinavia. And because we have to see the big picture, we have to really defy the classic laws of putting things in boxes. And I'm sure that you could speak to Emelie about digitalization, and she could speak to you about, mangroves and food. And I'm sure that Kai could talk about new kinds of possibilities with food production. But what is the overall vision here? What are we actually trying to do in our own stories? Is to, achieve the Paris Agreement? Is this what we're trying to do? Or are there wider goals? Briefly.
Yeah, maybe I could just go there. I would say for us, it's really about regenerative food systems at scale.
Yeah.
So transforming the food system from one that kind of degenerates and takes away to one that puts back and regenerates more than is taken.
Right.
Put simply. And so through doing that, you will reduce emissions, you will improve biodiversity, and you will improve livelihoods if handled correctly. And so, in summary, that's what we're aiming at doing. And I think others are too.
Right. Kai?
Yeah, at Max, I think the biggest thing we can do is to inspire others to do more. So we should, measure everything, the whole value chain. We should reduce emissions all the time, and we should capture as much carbon as we can already today. So we're not going to go for a carbon neutral society. We're going to go for a climate positive society or net negative emissions. That means we have to remove this kind of heating blanket that we have around this heating globe. So we have to remove some of the carbon we already emitted, and that's what we're going for. And today there are 11 more companies that has gone climate positive in the same way as Max, just doing that, reducing the whole value chain emissions, and then at the same time using some kind of offsets, mostly nature-based solutions to capture carbon again. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. And from your perspective, Emelie, how do you see the digitalization role in this going forward?
So digitalization is a part of all of these solutions. I think, how we can start to acting and actually enabling more action within the sector. And I think agriculture is something that we haven't not really tapped into. It's a quite slow process, and I think we can really do a lot. And it's also about innovation. Innovate what we do. We talk about the future of the food system and, what we can eat. And I think we need to think about that. Yeah. And also maybe eat less. Sometimes.
That's very possible. Yeah, exactly. Well, look, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Owen, for staying with us. Thank you very much, Emelie, and thank you to Kai in Stockholm. Shame we couldn't have these wonderful Tickells from Kiss the Ground through the magic of Zoom. But hello.
We're here. We're here. I don't know if you can see us. But
you are actually here.
Yes.
Wow.
Nice to speak with you.
That's amazing. We do actually have them all the way from sunny California?
Indeed.
Not so sunny in Glasgow, I can promise you that. So I've seen your film Kiss the Ground, and really well done. And
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about regenerative agriculture and how the devil are you going to top Kiss the Ground with Kiss the Ground 2? When you actually produce that, because the first one was so brilliant.
Well, thank you. The second one's gonna knock your socks off.
Hey, good thing I didn't wear socks then.
Yeah. Really, think about the context of Kiss the Ground. COP21 was big news in that film. That was 5 years ago. So we were really in the world of the Paris Accord, and that was the time at which the Conference of Parties hadn't really recognized regeneration as a massive tool in this equation of how do we get to net zero. Here we are 5 years later. Obviously, emissions globally have gone up. And now there is a recognition that the legacy load of the teraton or 1,000 gigatons of carbon in the atmosphere, we have to put it somewhere. And solar panels aren't going to put it anywhere. Wind turbines aren't going to put it anywhere. Electric vehicles aren't going to do that. These are all critical technologies that we need to push for, as well as decarbonization. Of course, this is critical for the survival of our species. We must do these things. But there is a bigger conversation to be had. And you asked previously, is there a larger goal? Are we just trying to get to net zero? And yes, better than net zero, that's good. But bigger than that, we have to start thinking in terms of planetary balance. Mm-hmm. And for the first time, we have this confluence of almost 200 countries coming together to talk about what is a problem. The flip side of this is a management solution. And when we begin to understand that a desert or an area of the globe that has become desertified, such as Africa, 65% of the arable land, or the United States, 10% of the arable land, most of which has become desertified, when we see those as management problems, and we realize, wow, regeneration is the tool set that we have to reverse that, to bring life back, to bring this trillion tree initiative, that's a great start. Technically, we need 3 trillion trees. That's how many we've lost since the start of industrialization, since the start of humanity. So these are the tools that we have that are in the long run, perhaps more powerful in terms of planetary balance than only decarbonizing. Not that we should not decarbonize, not that we don't need to push for decarbonization, absolutely. But we have forgotten a huge, if not the majority piece of the equation.
Right.
And to answer your question about how are we going to top Kiss the Ground, really this next film focuses on food and how our food system really is more of a chemical agricultural system versus making a food system that's not only about growing nutrients for our bodies, but also creating a food system that's in balance with the environment that also, by the way, can sequester carbon and, heal our small water cycles, which is imperative that we start to look at that. I mean, that's the best carbon capture technology that we've seen. Yeah. The best carbon technology to draw down carbon is a tree, or better yet, tall grasses. And so this new film really looks at how what we eat every day affects these large systems and our smaller systems where we live, and how ultimately that's a pathway to achieve what we're talking about here at this conference, which isn't just reversing the amount of carbon that we're emitting, but also looking at a whole systems approach, how we can get back to the land and how we can all participate that by what we eat.
So to a certain extent, we have known some of the elements of this for some time. Why do you think governments aren't really moving as fast as they should do on regenerative agriculture? Is it because they're dumb? Is it because they haven't heard about it before? Is it all of the above? Is it because they don't know how to monetize it with, say, smallholder farmers in the developing world? What is stopping this? And the farmers themselves, of course, they can be quite conservative, because if they screw up, right, with a new idea, they die because there's no food in the house. Yeah.
Well, I think politicians are smart, but I think it's, at least in the United States, we have a very big problem, which is the influence of corporate money. Mm-hmm. And so being, 7th generation farming family myself, it's not that my family want to continue farming corn and soybeans using chemicals as the base. I think it's more an issue of farmers being trapped into a system where they're debt serfs to the subsidies that they are reliant on to continue farming. Yeah. And so here in the US, we have to completely rewrite our farm bill, step one. Step two, we have to really educate people about the fact that we don't have to continue to have farmers as debt serfs, but that actually farmers can profit and they can do what they love to do, which is to take care of their land for future generations by making this very scary transition, which will only happen when we start to funnel money to farmers to help them to support that transition, because most of the time they're going to lose their crop insurance. And then finally, really politicians being beholden to their constituents versus beholden to the people that are funding their campaigns. Yeah, that's another issue, but that's what I see. What do you think?
Well, just to bolster what Rebecca is saying and follow up, the UK, after Kiss the Ground came out, the UK changed its farm bill from a system of subsidization for monocrops, specifically corn and soy and wheat, to a system where the subsidy goes to a farmer that is performing ecosystem services. So what does that mean? That means putting carbon in the soil, augmenting soil. That means putting trees on the land, creating windrows. That means biodiversity, creating ecosystems habitat and ecosystems throughways. It means that when you monetize the ecosystem in a positive way versus an extractive way, you begin to incentivize positive change. And so you asked if there was an economic incentive or disincentive. Right now we have many economic disincentives, and we have structured economic incentives for extraction. So on a larger scale, what we're really talking about is a regenerative economy, an economic model where we begin to monetize positive ecosystemic change, because in the fabric of any nation state, it is in the interest of that state to continue. And if we're incentivizing extraction, we're literally shortening the lifespan of our countries and our world. So there is an economic argument to be made. There's a larger concern with regeneration in terms of the Conference of Parties. And that is, this is soft technology. This is labor-based. This is very scalable. It's extremely replicable, and it can happen very fast globally. The concern, I think, is, well, if we do regeneration, then it gives countries an excuse to take their foot off of the accelerator for decarbonization. And that thinking is old. They are not mutually exclusive. In fact, we need both. We need decarbonization. We need the technologies, but the technologies will not feed 10 billion people. They will not balance the climate in deserts. They will not bring the Middle East back to life. They will not bring stabilization for Africa and the migration crisis. They will not ultimately bring planetary balance in and of themselves. They are tools. And humans, we're tool makers. We love our tools. But we need to think big picture now, because time is running out.
Yep.
And we need to understand that regeneration is law. It's like gravity. It's always been here. It'll always be here, whether we're here or not. That's the big question. If we use regeneration as the tool that exists, we have the potential to sustain all of humanity well into the future in an abundant and very balanced climate.
So thank you with that. We're going to have to close it there, but thank you so much for coming on. The Tickells, who are doing an amazing job with regenerative agriculture. And actually, thank you. And gave us a super segue on the issue of agricultural subsidies to another big issue that we want to highlight, which is the fossil fuel subsidies, of course, which are now, since this COP started, standing at over 22 billion that's already been spent whilst we've all been sitting around here enjoying Glasgow. My God. Come on board and tell us about this Mehmet Erdogan, correct? Please join us from the United Nations Development Programme. Tell us how we can interact with this new campaign that UNDP has started.
So I work for UNDP, UN Development Program, for an initiative called Climate Promise, which is the largest global climate initiative supporting countries around the world on setting their nationally determined contributions. So this is really important work, but it is very high-level policy work. And as you know, with high-level policy work, it is often really difficult to engage people emotionally and mobilize them for action. So we were sitting around thinking, how can we really create an emotionally engaging advocacy initiative and bring citizens all around the world with us on the road to COP26. So this is how we came up with our campaign, Dear World Leaders. And basically what we did is we asked people several questions. We said, how is the climate crisis impacting you right now? Not just in some fictional future like 2030 or 2050, but already. And what would you like to tell world leaders about climate change? Because we know that world leaders are meeting in Glasgow for COP26, and we wanted to create a platform that would allow people from all around the world to carry their messages to Glasgow with us as UN Development Program. And the result is basically what you will see on our platform called Dear World Leaders. It's www.dearworldleaders.org, and I think we have some videos that we can show you here today. And we hope you will enjoy it. And
exactly.
Share it.
We would love to see that video run right now, guys.
It's that we were hoping to be in a different place, and we're running out of time. And as Maldivians, we feel that more than others. But in times of crisis, I feel that we kind of lose all labels and just be humans together, working collectively to solve the problem that faces us all. And it's been beautiful to be a part of. There are interesting things happening. The youth are active, but we do need the help to kind of do the things that is going to be too slow otherwise. So help us build back better.
Le phénomène du changement climatique est perceptible dans notre localité. Il s'agit de la baisse de pluie dans notre localité. À l'exemple, vous avez le champ derrière moi, c'est un champ qui a été produit, mais par manque de pluie, nous voilà dans ce champ. Il s'agit également de la baisse de la fertilité du sol. Nous avons aussi la menace sur la biodiversité. Et comme solution, nous proposons aux décideurs le reboisement, la lutte contre la coupe abusive des arbres et l'approvisionnement en eau des communautés. Et c'est ça qui va faire chasser le changement, le phénomène du changement climatique ici chez nous.
So maybe we'll just pause the video there. Let me just also clear up something very clearly. UNDP has got two very good campaigns running. One is this one here, Tell Your World Leader, and the other one is about the fossil fuel subsidies, which are so huge. Do apologise. And this gentleman asked a question of me, where does that come from? That comes from the International Monetary Fund, and we don't have time as crunch the numbers on what is happening each day in terms of the spending of the fossil fuel subsidies. Correct? Yes. Correct. Good. I'm going to escort you this way, I think, and Ingmar is going to come on and talk about that. Thank you very much. Ingmar. Count up. Good point.
Counting how much fossil fuels subsidize since the start of the COP meeting.
Right.
So it's right now $22 billion. That is what the world governments are sponsoring the fossil fuel industry right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we're talking about change and talking about limiting the emission, our governments around the world, all countries are doing this. They are financing and sponsoring the destruction.
Yeah.
And the United Nations Development Program has a campaign called Don't Choose Extinction. It's a brilliant video in the UN headquarters where it's a dinosaur that is reminding us that they got extinct because of the asteroids. And what we're doing now is that we're sponsoring those asteroids instead of having them not to hit the planet.
Exactly.
So this is something too few people are aware of. It's something too few people talk about, and it's something that no one do anything about.
Yeah.
And regarding the We Don't Have Time app, we're a review platform for the climate. You could give climate love for what's great and climate warning for what's bad.
Yeah.
Earlier here today in the Swedish pavilion, we had the Prime Minister of Sweden, Stefan Löfven, and I asked a question about those numbers.
Yeah.
And he answered that question and had kind of an excuse. It's always those excuses, right? The excuse was that we have this corona, we need to rebuild our economy, blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So there's no plan. There's no plan to end those subsidies. Nothing. It's just continue, and it's increasing. It's 7% of the global GDP. And next year, it's estimated to be even higher. So I think we should focus not just on the mission, we should focus on this. We need to turn this to zero. It's super important. And if you agree with this, download the We Don't Have Time app and get involved. And I hope that we could show this dinosaur movie right now, actually.
okay? You need a minute? Cool. Okay. Listen up, people. I know a thing or two about extinction. And let me tell you, and you'd kind of think this would be obvious, going extinct is a bad thing. And driving yourselves extinct? In 70 million years, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. At least we had an asteroid. What's your excuse? You're headed for a climate disaster, and yet every year governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now. Think of all the other things you could do with that money. Around the world, people are living in poverty. Don't you think helping them would make more sense than, I don't know, paying for the demise of your entire species? Let me be real for a second. You've got a huge opportunity right now. As you rebuild your economies and bounce back from this pandemic, this is humanity's big chance. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes. Thank you.
In this first film of the series, we will look at food production and nature-based solutions. Improvement from these sectors can lead to a significant reduction of the world's total greenhouse gas emissions, at the same time as it enables richer harvests and food that contains more nutrition. It would also lead to boosted ecosystem services such as better groundwater and prevention of droughts, bushfires, and flooding. It's a win-win situation. We will look at some examples of how to do it. Today, the world emits around 55 gigatons of greenhouse gases. Food production accounts for almost 1/4 of these emissions. Food production is also threatening biodiversity and crucial ecosystems important for the stability of the entire Earth system. In fact, food production is threatening food supply itself. As much as around 65% of the emissions from the food sector are coming from the meat industry. The practice of growing crops such as soya to feed the cattle demand huge amounts of farmlands, and sometimes forests and even natural and rainforests are cut down to grow the crops for the livestock. This is a waste of natural resources and carbon sequestering systems that we today definitely cannot afford. If the cattle would eat grass, which is their natural diet, we could spare a lot of farmlands and carbon sequestering ecosystems. In addition, the grasslands and pastures themselves would function as carbon sinks and also preserve biodiversity. Governments should support the whole process of the meat production, making it more sustainable, resource effective, and climate friendly.
If we are going to feed humanity on current lands that we call grazing lands, it's going to have to come at a reduction in meat consumption globally.
When it comes to agriculture, we could also reduce a lot of carbon emissions at the same time as we secure the source of food itself, the soil. Soils are thousands of years old, and they are the prerequisite of almost everything living on land, yet we are depleting the soils. Overusing of fertilizers, as well as monoculture growing and too much tilling in the long run, stop the soil from creating nutrition. Nutrition that we all, plants, animals and humans, depend on. We see it all over the world today. Soils are dying. But if using less or no fertilizers, and instead using crop rotation and leaving unused parts of the crops on the field, and by using less or no tilling systems, the soils can stay alive and healthy, at the same time as we avoid a lot of carbon emissions and also enable the soil to store carbon. Using crop rotation also decontaminates between different crops, and less or no pesticides could be used. Pesticides are contributing to the extinction of pollinators on which 75% of our agricultural crops depend. If governments support reforms and change of practices, food production can halve their emissions already by 2030, at the same time as the soils and the harvests become richer and deliver more nutrition to people. The single greatest solution of all for absorbing carbon from the atmosphere is preserving and replanting forests. Recent research shows that the impact the forests have on the climate, as well as on the whole Earth system, is even bigger than we knew before. As well as sequestering huge amount of carbons, the forests have a cooling effect themselves and can decrease temperature by several degrees. Furthermore, they create rainfall, preventing erosion and earth flows, and they play a main role in the life-creating system of soil, microbes, fungus, pollinators and other animals that supply our food. Most important of all forests are the natural forests. Only a few % of the planet's natural forests remain, which is bad for growth and security for life on Earth.
So what has to be a number one priority going forward is protection of these tropical areas, these natural forest areas. There's not many of them left, and I think we need to hold on to every single last one of these areas that we have.
Another thing that we had not really realized before is what an important role wetlands play. Wetlands secure groundwater, clean drinking water, prevent drought, bushfires and flooding, and sequester a tremendous amount of carbon. As much as 90% of the planet's wetlands, though, have been drained. Drained wetlands are constantly leaking huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. In some nations, 1/5 of the nation's total emissions come from drained wetlands. The good thing is that many of the drained wetlands do not work very well for agriculture and can quite easily be restored with a considerable amount of emission reduced. Food production, forestry and land use have the potential to go from being a large part of the climate change and biodiversity loss problem to being one of the most important solutions. If sufficient measures are made fast enough by governments, half of the emissions from these sectors can be reduced by 2030, and much more during the following decades.
Right, we need disruptors to get these things moving, right? And we need them in technologies, we need them in policies. And the industry, when it's connected to agriculture and also the food tech and food industry and beverage industry, really needs to change status quo. That we can agree on. And for this to happen, we need brave actors, and we're going to meet some of them right now here on stage in Glasgow. And I'm proud to introduce, first of all, a person that has really been pushing for climate action for quite a while. This is Johan Falk from Exponential Roadmap Initiative. And he's with us here, waiting to get up on stage. And he is co-founder and also head of Exponential Climate Roadmap Initiative. And Johan is also lead author and co-founder of the roadmap and lead author of the 1.5 Business Playbook. He was early on one of the initiators behind the carbon law idea together with Johan Rockström. So Johan Falk is really a man who has pushed for this for quite a while. So Johan, please join me on stage. Wonderful to have you with us here, and you will share some perspectives on how this sector of society can scale down and disrupt. So you have the floor. You're welcome.
Thank you. Yes, great to be here. So to keep global warming below 2 degrees with a goal to stay at 1.5, it's absolutely necessary to scale nature climate solutions exponentially. So it's about protecting and restoring forests. It's about okay, we'll try again. So it's about protecting and restoring forests. Okay. Thank you. Okay. It's about changing how we manage forestry. It's about transforming agriculture and our diets. So this is just as important as the energy transformation. So I'll talk a little bit about the foundation behind it, which is the carbon law and the exponential roadmap and the nature-based solutions, a little bit where we are today, and key call to actions for citizens, governments, and business. But first I'd like to highlight a little bit about the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, what it is. So what we are doing is we bring together innovators, transformers, and disruptors taking action in line with the 1.5 ambition to halve emissions by 2030 through exponential climate action and solutions. And we are an independent initiative anchored in science and linked to the UN Race to Zero. And we today represent something like $800 billion in revenue. We actually doubled the last 6 months. So science is really clear, as we all know, that we need to halve emissions every decade towards net zero by latest 2050 to avoid very dangerous climate change. And that is called the carbon law, as we know. And all different sectors need to reduce in parallel, as we know, such as energy, industry, buildings, and transport. But just as important is nature-based solutions, both sources and sinks, and transformation of food. So they represent something like a third of the total. So we won't fix this unless we don't address nature climate solutions as well. And we published something called the Exponential Roadmap, which you can download, where we basically show that solutions exist to halve emissions by 2030 and also in nature climate solutions. So we actually highlight something like 14 out of 36 solutions are nature climate solutions and food-based solutions. And some of the key solutions are, of course, protection of forests, restoration of forests, transformation of forestry and agriculture, but also transformation of diets towards more plant-rich food. So what is the opportunity? There is just a new study published by leading scientists in global change biology, and it states that we do have a potential to cut 8 to 14 billion tons per year from 2020 to 2050, and that represents something like 20 to 30% of the total. About 50% come from forests, 35% from agriculture, and 15% from the demand side from us as consumers. And it's also important to state that the majority are also linked to developing countries, something like 80%. So, are we on track to realize this opportunity? The answer is unfortunately no. We're still moving in the wrong direction. And to get the shift, we need leading actors from governments, from businesses and citizens to start to accelerate change in a new direction, a new sustainable direction. So to conclude a little bit, what will be important? What will be the important call to actions for citizens? What can we do as citizens and consumers? Well, firstly, it's about shifting our consumption to start to halve down our own emissions, like moving to plant-based food, reduce food waste, and becoming more circular in our consumption, of course. And what about the governments? What do they need to do? Well, they need to set very strong and clear targets for protection of ecosystems and forests, not only for climate. Governments also need to deliver on the 100 billion promise to development countries. That's absolutely essential. And it's also important to never use nature climate solutions as a substitute to cut your own emissions, like offsetting. It should be done as a complement and can never be traded. And finally, what is important for businesses? Well, we should start with the baseline. The baseline is always to cut your own emissions every decade, following the carbon law, okay? But the second thing is, what can you do as a company within your value chain if you have a substantial impact of nature? Like if you're a food company or a furniture company, well, you need to help to shift your value chain towards sustainable forestry and agriculture and take full responsibility for that. But you can also influence your consumers towards more sustainable choices, such as plant-rich foods. So your opportunity to influence is also very, very important if you're facing a lot of customers. And finally, we strongly recommend to companies that apart from cutting your emissions according to the carbon law, you should absolutely consider to invest in protection and restoration of nature, because we need these investments the next 10 years. That can't wait. And it could represent basically your own footprint. We think that's absolutely necessary and fair. So to conclude, nature climate solutions is just as important as the energy transformation and the circular transformation. But we should never use it instead of cutting our own emissions. That's absolutely essential. And we need to accelerate actions from all parties. Thank you. Over to you, Katarina. Thank you.
Fascinating to listen to you with this clear vision that Exponential Roadmap Initiative puts to the table. And for those watching now, that company leaders that might not be already part of ERI,
yeah.
What does it entail? Is it difficult to join in I mean, you have had quite an exponential action towards getting more on board. So how do they reach out, and what does it entail to become to become members of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative?
Yes, firstly, I encourage all companies, of course, to join the UN Race to Zero. We are one of the organizations which is connected to UN Race to Zero, not the only one. But I would say that we are the initiative with the sharpest requirements, and we, of course, very proud of that, because the idea is to bring together the absolute leaders, so that's important. And we have like an assessment process, which means basically that the companies need to fulfill these criteria, but we can also onboard companies very quickly, within a month, I would say, practically.
And you help them along initially?
Yes, and we also make like a gap analysis, so we can actually highlight, we think that you have the gaps. We talk about the 4-pillar model, basically, that here are the gaps, and hopefully it will encourage companies also to address these gaps, but they need to come to a sufficient level to be able to join the initiative, basically.
So it's just to contact and see if a company is eligible, and you can always be coached by you.
Exactly, and they can always use all our resources, like the business playbook and all the other things. And I would also like to encourage smaller companies to join the SME Climate Hub. The SME Climate Hub is a joint venture with We Mean Business and ICC and UN Race to Zero, particularly for small companies. So we sort of implementing these principles, but in a much more light way for smaller companies, with the idea to bring tools and simplified reporting over time to these companies.
So how many companies have now joined the SME Climate Hub?
It was launched last year, so it's something like 2,500. So it's a reasonably good curve. But the goal is, of course, to reach 1 million and 10 million over time. But in order to do that, we need this exponential scaling strategies. We're working with that with our partners, with outreach partners and with different governments who can actually spread the message. Like in UK, have been pretty successful to do that, but also to raise the value proposition, to bring on board free and open tools and reporting, so make it very attractive for small companies. I think that's achievable. Yes.
Thank you, Johan. And during these 2 weeks here at the COP, from the perspective of food and nature-based solutions and exponentiality, what can you see happening here?
I can see that we will get a much closer connection between climate and nature, because it's so incredibly interrelated. In order to achieve the climate targets, we absolutely need to work with nature-based targets as well, and companies and all actors need also to invest in action and in funding on nature as well, because nature is, of course, the best protector we have in the short term, to give us some time also to mitigate, our own emissions. So I think that will be the outcome. There are a lot of activities, as you can see, in COP, particularly working on that theme.
Well, that's indeed very hopeful.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Johan Falk, for your extraordinary work in this field.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye then.
I'm now turning to Jan Svärd, who is with us here in Glasgow. He is head of engineering at EasyMining. And this is a fascinating achievement here in circular management of resources. EasyMining's technical solutions, specifically for recycling raw materials, for instance from sewage sludge or also from fly ash and other things, have several times received support for their potential to reduce climate emissions. So I'm very happy to have Jan Svärd with me here, and you will come up here on stage and give a presentation. And also you have a colleague joining us from Stockholm later on, and a video to share. Yes. So I'm handing over to you here for a keynote presentation, and you're very welcome to be here in the Nordic Pavilion at We Don't Have Time broadcast.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. And it feels very good to be a disruptor. of course, I hope it now works also from Stockholm. But I want to talk about nitrogen today, because nitrogen is a very important, nitrogen fertilizers is a really important fertilizer for actually food production. So if we wouldn't have that, we would have much less food production and actually not enough food for everybody. So that's why it fits in here. Also, of course, it has a lot of problems with nitrogen. Also, when it's produced, you will see, the raw materials is natural gas and air. So it's very energy intensive production. On top of that, when it's used, if you have too much in one location, you will have a lot of environmental issues, eutrophication, dead sea bottoms and what have you, a lot of issues. Then, of course, it comes into a wastewater treatment plant. And then in the wastewater treatment plant, you try to take away the nitrogen from the water flow. And you will very often get a lot of N2O, which is laughing gas, which is an even more potent environmental or greenhouse gas. So up to almost 300 times more than carbon dioxide. So it's a lot of issues with this, and it needs to be resolved. And now I hope that Anna, who is the marketing manager of EasyMining, and I'm the CEO, but she should be there in Stockholm now and tell us how this is solved.
Absolutely. Johan, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hello?
I hear you now.
Great.
And we need
Thank
to
you
move
very
one
much.
slide forward in here.
Great. Will you change the slide, please? Great. Here's the linear flow that you were explaining, Jan. And if we are serious with creating a sustainable and circular and climate neutral society, we have to reuse the resources that we already have as many times as possible. And that is what we want to do with this process and this technology. If you want to take the next slide, please. What we want to do is to close the loop for the nitrogen that we already have extracted from the atmosphere and reuse it in society in, for example, mineral fertilizers that you were talking about, John, instead of just releasing it back to the atmosphere after removing it from waste streams. Our technology is a two-step process, as you can see in the picture. In the first process, we catch the nitrogen with a chemical, and we catch more than 98% of the ammonium nitrogen in water streams without causing laughing gas emission or nitrous gas oxide emissions. In the second step, we convert the ammonium nitrogen that we caught to an ammonium salt. And also the chemical that we use for catching the ammonium nitrogen is regenerated and sent back to the first step in the process, creating a circular material flow here as well, preventing additional climate emissions by not having to produce chemicals over and over again. The ammonium salt that we produce in the process is suitable to use in mineral fertilizers, replacing ammonium salts that today are produced in processes giving significant greenhouse gas emissions. The ironic thing, however, is that legislation today does not allow us to use this recycled nutrient, since legislation is linear today and look at origin instead of quality. We need to change that. Legislation needs to look at quality before origin. With our chemical process, we efficiently remove ammonium nitrogen from liquid waste streams containing a high concentration of ammonium nitrogen. And we do this, as I said, without causing laughing gas emissions. We also use less energy than otherwise would be needed in producing ammonium salts and removing nitrogen from the wastewater streams to prevent eutrophication. So at the moment, we are demonstrating this technology in an industrial pilot plant. The project that we have got finance from the EU LIFE program for will end in the summer of 2022. And we will not only demonstrate the process, we will also validate the climate impact from the process, as well as the energy and resource efficiency. We see great potential with this technology for liquid waste streams with a high concentration of ammonium and nitrogen. And this technology can both impact the climate footprint and create circular material flows for nitrogen. One of the very important application areas that we see is wastewater treatment plants. And that is why we have a wastewater treatment company, Biofos in Denmark, as one of the project partners in this project. We will now listen to Dennis Thornberg, Development Manager at Biofos, telling us about why it's so crucial for them to remove and recover the nitrogen, both for the wastewater treatment plant and for the society.
Hello, my name is Dennis Thornberg. I am the Development Manager in Biofos, and Biofos is the utility that treats all the wastewater in Copenhagen, Denmark. Wastewater contains all the compounds that we humans flush or lead to the drains. Among these are nitrogen, in a form that could be used as a fertilizer. In the old days, the toilet buckets were collected and taken to the fields, so the nitrogen returned to the natural nitrogen cycle. This is not possible today from large cities. The risk of spreading disease is much too big. This is why we have the wastewater treatment plants. So the large cities have a very large accumulation of nitrogen that will cause eutrophication when it's led to the receiving waters without any treatment. So this is actually why we are removing nitrogen, and we have been removing nitrogen in Biofos for 25 years. The method we're using today, the biological nitrogen removal, involves the use of energy, and the nitrogen gets lost to the atmosphere. So we find the option of recovering nitrogen very interesting. And if we can produce an ammonia product that could actually be used as fertilizer, that would be very interesting too. The advantages for Biofos is that for every kilo of nitrogen we recover, we could actually save about 1 kilowatt of power. Potentially that could lead to a saving of about 2 gigawatt hours per year if it would be realized in all 3 Biofos treatment plants. Furthermore, the capacity of the biological wastewater treatment would actually be increased significantly, and that would mean a lot in our already partly overloaded plant, one of them. In conclusion, this climate-friendly process is actually, that is closing the nitrogen circle, is of high interest and relevance for all wastewater treatment plants in the world. Thank you.
You could say, in summary, you can say that this is, to really be a disruptor, you need a technology, and I think we're really there. We are testing, we are very close. You need a market, and you can hear from Dennis, this is really wanted from the market. You need to be, in reducing greenhouse gases and have a good environmental case, and we have that. And now we only need also, of course, this to be legislation to be in line with what's needed for circular economy, because this is a perfect circular economy case, I would say. So this is what we need from the legislators. We don't need the subsidies, we just need them to legislate so quality comes first and then comes origin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johan Svärd. I'll keep you here for a moment or two because
Sure.
I have some questions.
Absolutely.
Which are the biggest obstacles for this to happen in terms of legislation and more specifically?
Yeah, so the almost the only one, because here is also a requirement from the wastewater treatment to not emit so much, and it's a push from many of them. But the legislative part is actually to be able to use something from waste as a fertilizer.
And this is
if it's a waste, you can sometimes get a permit just to spread it as a waste. But if it's a product, then you need to look at the origins. And that's of course completely crazy. This is a very clean and pure product.
And in terms of your hopes for what will come out of the COP, because this is a big connection, of course. What hopes do you have?
Yeah, I hope this comes up, that it's really circular economy can fix a lot of the greenhouse gas emission problems that is there. And then, of course, the new legislations that's being launched now by legislators needs to be in line with what's required for circular, because it's all based on what's linear. And it's for nitrogen, it's for phosphorus, and even for salts and things like that. So you need to be in line with the new economy.
And this is also, of course, a global topic.
Absolutely.
It's something that we need to address in every country.
Absolutely. So nitrogen is all over. So it's a global issue. Phosphorus is a global issue, and so on. So of course, yes, absolutely.
So if I would have to have you back, let's say 5 years from now, and talk to you about this, what would have happened?
I would say we built a few plants, and it's starting to operate. But of course, these have long lead times. So maybe not 10 plants, but 5 plants we hope to have in 5 years from now. So that's really to be there, and they are running well, and we want to build more.
But you can't manage this all by yourself. So you need sort of, if you say competitors or colleagues or other operations to also chip in, right?
No, and that's of course what makes circular economy so fun, but also complicated, is that it's you cannot do it by yourself.
No.
You need to have partners. So in this case, you need to know something about fertilizers, you need to know something about chemistry and things like that. You need to know about wastewater and so on, and even we have a very close collaboration on this one with Alfa Laval, who is doing the counters and equipment and so on. So you need to build an infrastructure and a partnership system as well. And that, of course, if you ask for 5 years, we would like to have that all in place.
Well, it is really, really promising what you put forward here. So, best of luck.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for doing this on our broadcast here today. And thank you to your colleague at Biofos and also your colleague Anna in Stockholm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Svärd. Thank you. So, I'm sure all of us have heard of Patagonia. A trailblazer and frontrunner, and indeed a disruptor in the field of, textiles and fashion for that matter. So we're very happy to have with us here today Beth Thorén. She is an Environmental Action and Initiatives Director, EMEA at Patagonia. And she's with us here by Zoom. She joined Patagonia from her position as Deputy Chief Executive at Client Earth. And before, Beth spent 4 years as Director of Fundraising and Communications at RSPB, which is the largest UK nature conservancy charity. So she really has a broad perspective on this topic. Beth is a passionate defender of nature, and she came to the NGO sector following a sabbatical that she spent as a crew on the Sea Shepherd campaign ship. So, warm welcome to Beth Thorén from Patagonia. So,
hello, can you hear me?
Yes, and now I can see you too, Beth. Wonderful. Well, the floor is yours.
Brilliant. I'll go ahead and start. Thank you.
Yes, please.
One day, I was on the deck of a ship, and I looked down, and there was a whale swimming along the side of the ship. And the whale turned slightly, and it started to look, and it looked up at me. And the whale was enormous. It was nearly the size of the ship itself. And when it looked at me, I noticed intelligence, I noticed curiosity. But the thing that was really extraordinary was that I felt, when I looked into the blackness of her eyes, that I was looking into infinity. It was awe-inspiring and it was spiritual. And that was the moment that changed my life. That was the moment when I went from being a marketing director, which I'd been for years and years, and decided that I needed to protect the planet and everyone and everything on it. And that's why I'm here today. And that's how I got to where I am. I'm, you just heard, I'm the Director of Environmental Action at Patagonia. And for those of you who don't know, Patagonia is a purpose-driven company. It's in business to save the home planet. It's also a billion-dollar company, and it also has the highest corporate reputation in the world. And that probably comes from 50 years of working on its footprint, looking after employees all over the world, and for campaigning for justice and for the planet. Now, it's really unusual, and it's unfortunate that it's a bit of an oxymoron to hear a successful company on one hand, and on the other, hear about the best and highest corporate reputation in the world. And as we have started to see more and more climate strategies come out from corporations, this is making us all really uncomfortable, because what we're seeing, some are good, but some are really confusing at best, and others are actually about greenwashing. And we need to get beyond this. We need to get beyond this blah, blah, blah. We have to rebuild trust in the process, because if we don't rebuild trust, then people aren't going to have hope. And if they don't have hope, they won't act. And if they don't act, we will fail. So that is why we need to rebuild trust. And I'd like to share with you how Patagonia thinks about this. I can't say that we have all the answers. We certainly don't. But I'll just give you our point of view. And the first step is cutting the bullshit. It's about being honest. And right now, every time that Patagonia sells a jacket, we add to the problem. And while Patagonia is one of the first companies to talk about being carbon neutral, the more that we learned about it, the more we found out that carbon neutrality is a smokescreen. There is one essential thing we need to do, which is we need to cut our emissions, and we need to cut them in line with science, and we need to cut them across our full supply chain. Full stop, no buts. And if that is the first thing and the one thing that you must do, then it's really, what I can share about that is that it's absolutely terrifying. It is really, really difficult to do. As we went through that process of looking at emissions, we looked at cutting our growth. We looked at materials. Currently, 70% of our materials are renewable or recyclable. We need to get that to 100. We looked at selling more secondhand product, but we kept hitting a wall, and that wall was our supply chain. 95% of our emissions was coming from our supply chain. And we were tiny in comparison to the factories and the other brands that we were dealing with. Which leads you to my second point, and that's you cannot succeed in this new world without collaborating if you're a business. Now, what the team did is they worked really hard, and they came up with a solution which apparently is unique. And that's about getting together with a number of other smaller brands and jointly using carbon offsets and incentivizing the factories to make emission savings in the supply chain. We think with that innovation, we will be able to meet our science-based targets. We're not sure, but we think we can. And the basis of that was hard work and collaboration. The third thing that I think is really important to a climate strategy is influence. Actions are essential, for sure, but influence matters even more. Just imagine if Greta Thunberg had decided she was worried about climate and decided to just be a vegetarian. It would have been great, but what would the world have lost if we had lost her voice? How much passion, how much energy, the size of the youth movement has been enormous in helping drive change. And that's the impact of influence. And for Patagonia, we've done some of this for years. We have worked on natures and communities and used our money and our influence to protect them from working with indigenous communities in Alaska in the Tongass Forest. And the Tongass Forest accounts for or absorbs 8% of all the emissions in the United States. It's hugely important, and yet the Trump administration was going to, mine it and drive a road through it. Another thing we do is we stand up for disadvantaged communities of color, where there's pollution, and factories being built that are destroying their health. We know that nature provides 20 to 30% of the solution. What we've learned of the solution to climate change. But what we've learned is that when you align climate, nature, and communities together, that is when you get acceleration. And that is what we try to do in everything that we work on. So that's what we've been doing for years. What's new now with the urgency, is that sense of working together with like-minded business to influence for change, to lobby for positive change in government. And we did an example of that is recently we wrote an open letter with a number of other businesses to support Joe Biden's Build Back Better Act. Our voices are much stronger when we act together. Now, Patagonia can't claim to have all the answers, but that's broadly how we think one can create an authentic climate strategy. Now, what's our ask today as COP begins? Well, our ask is this. Our ask of the policymakers is regulate us. Yep, that's right. A company is saying regulate us, but we need it. My God, do we need it? We have got to set global standards for carbon accounting and carbon offsetting. Right now, it's a wild west out there. There's lack of clarity and it feeds greenwashing and delays meaningful action. We need a set of global standards and targets that every company is working to. What's our message for business? Join us. Cut the bullshit, cut the blah, blah, blah. Let's use our voices together. We can be so much stronger together and we can drive this change. And what's our ask of you, citizens, employees of many companies? Our ask is that you challenge us. Keep pushing us. You know, whatever it is that makes each of us act, whether it's the eye of a whale, whether it's the people who will die if you don't act, or whether it's the future of your own child, let's cut the bullshit. Let's demand more of each other. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Bethell. That was extremely inspirational to listen to you. And I'd like to ask you for some advice for other company leaders or parts of organizations, big or small. You talk a lot about collaboration. And what are your best tips, advice for people to get to collaborate? You talk about really not being able to address all the scopes in your supply chains, for instance, without looking to collaborate. What are your best advice to approach this?
Well, the first thing is you actually have to have the need. It's that is what drove us to collaborate. It was that recognition that we could not do it alone. And if you absolutely need others, that is when you start having productive conversations with them. So that is where, I would start. And then, I guess, we have always had this view that, like I said, we're in business to save our planet. So we have an attitude of openness. We don't try to say this is our innovation, this is, this is our patent or our copyright. Whenever we develop a new technology on materials, we give it away. And, I guess that attitude with which we approach collaboration is something that people recognize in us as being authentic and they're ready to work with us. And to the extent that you can have that, I would encourage it.
Well, thank you so much. And it will be interesting, of course, to keep following Patagonia's trailblazing work, and you're truly a disruptor. And thank you very much for joining us here today on the We Don't Have Time broadcast.
Pleasure, thank you.
I am now turning to introduce panelists for a talk on this topic. And I'm delighted to have with me from the Netherlands, Wessel van Eyden, who is Global Marketing and Communications Director at Just Dig It, and is also Executive Board Member at Just Dig It. Wessel is a purpose communication specialist, and his career started as Marketing Director for ID&T and their Sensation event. And since 2013, Wessel has headed up global communications and marketing at Just Dig It. And let's say hello to Wessel and make sure that he is with us here on Zoom.
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Great to hear your voice, Vessel. And also I'd like to introduce Ole Christian Sivertsen. He is CEO of Desert Control, and he in 2019 he joined CEO as CEO of Desert Control, and he's fueled his passion for creating hope for a better future for people and planet. Desert Control is a company specialized in climate-smart agri-tech solutions to combat desertification, as you can tell by its name, and also soil degradation and water scarcity. And Ole, do we have you with us here?
Happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Excellent. And also I'm happy to introduce Martin Renck. He's a founder and creative director at Way Out. And Martin has 25 years of experience as creative director and entrepreneur, leading organizations within advertising, branding, and also innovations. And Martin's clients include big companies like Nike, Chanel, Siemens, Absolute, and also clients like Madonna. So great to have you with us, Martin.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Excellent. So I'm going to start with you, Ole. And after the panel talk with me, I'm going to open up for some remarks and reflections from our hub in Stockholm, who's finally connected with us. Ole, your patented liquid natural clay is a fascinating product, if I may call it that, or a solution. Could you please tell the viewers a little bit about what it is all about?
Absolutely, and thank you very much. So liquid natural clay is a process that we have invented to turn minerals such as clay into a liquid that's nearly as thin as water. The advantage of having it as a liquid is that we can distribute it through existing irrigation systems, through drip lines, subsurface irrigation, all kinds of solutions. And this liquid will actually percolate into the soil by the force of gravity, and it will stick to each grain of sand throughout a sandy soil structure and create a soil structure that absorbs and holds on to water and nutrients just like a sponge, so that we can reduce water usage by up to 50% and increase crop yields as an active solution to help to combat desertification and the degradation of fertile soils, as well as being a part of reducing the water usage in the world.
It's a wonderful solution. And for the viewers that might not know this already, where is it used?
So our main areas are in agriculture for food production, also for forests, tree planting initiatives, and for green landscapes. And we're also looking for initiatives to really take part in larger ecosystem restoration initiatives, such as the Great Green Wall that we heard Ibrahim Thiaw speak about earlier today.
Thank you very much, Ole. I'm turning now to Vessel. You work with desertification and greening the planet, regreening it again, with what might seem like very simple tools. How can you could you please tell us how these techniques are disruptors?
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks for the invitation. So Just Dig It is all about restoring ecosystems. We have a focus on sub-Saharan Africa. We started out in Kenya, and to date we have restored 60,000 hectares of degraded land in Kenya and Tanzania. The techniques that we use, well, we're not called Just Dig It for nothing. We started out with rainwater harvesting techniques. So basically, where rainwater is unable to infiltrate into the soil, together with local Maasai communities, we have been digging a lot of earth mouths, which are like semicircular bunds, which allow the rainwater to, again, infiltrate into the soil, thereby automatically reclaiming large plots of land. And maybe the most scalable technique that we use is farmer-managed natural regeneration, which is a technique that we use in Tanzania, together with, amongst others, our amazing partner, Elite Foundation, is whereby we really have a strong communication approach towards smallhold farmers. And again, there are about 350 million of those in sub-Saharan Africa, to basically not just grow the same crop year in, year out. They can grow the same crop, but to combine trees with crops agroforestry, if you will, and especially that will lead to more crop yields for the farmers themselves. But yeah, it's also something that benefits all of us. As you all know, that trees sequester carbon, so we are living in a closed system. So to date, we have been able to sustainably regenerate, because we don't plant trees, we regenerate them. It's a long story, but we have been able to regenerate 6.3 million trees in the last 4 years.
It's a very, very, very strong process that you have set motion to here. So, Martin, from your vast experience as a communicator and an expert in promoting and communicating innovation, what are your reflections when you listen to Bethell and to Ole?
It certainly feels very interesting and relevant what they're doing. I can also sense a little bit of overlap into what we're doing. We're obviously also into what nowadays is popularly called sustainability. We are more consumer oriented, so we like to liken our concept to water 3D printers. And these are systems that are for local production and distribution of perfect drinking water with a minimal eco footprint on a commercial platform, because unless you can be commercial and create local jobs, no one will be really interested in implementing these systems or taking care of them. Our systems can use any source water. We filter it in several steps and then we remineralize it, and we're able to distribute it within a circular system, because we can also clean the vessels within our module. And why do we do this? Basically because it's the responsible thing to do. As we know, 1/3 of humanity does not have access to safe drinking water. And even in the global north, we're growing out of our built-in structures. So we have to restore natural balance, much as my colleagues or fellow entrepreneurs here are into also. And from our point, it starts with going local, using local resources, creating local jobs, and also enabling local prosperity. And because we're anti-centralized, we are deploying distributed systems. We're also resilient. And if it's one thing that we learned from these 2 last horrific years, is that we can no longer rely on global value chains. We have to go local, and we have to be autonomous and resilient in what we do. So we say that let's re-terraform Earth. And what that means is to make efficient use of resources, and to introduce no chemicals and no plastics, and also to avoid fossil fuel, of course, and reduce CO2. And as someone once said here just now, we're at the expo, and every day is filled with inspirational seminars. Someone said, touch the ground lightly, and I really like that expression.
So Martin, in what parts of the world do you operate?
We have operations today in East Africa, in Tanzania, in Kenya, and in Uganda. We're on our way to the islands outside of Tanzania, Zanzibar and Pemba mainly. And we're also heading out to the other islands in the Indian Ocean, and more or less on our way also to the great nation of India. So we're in the areas around the equator where we know that there's a specific problem with safe drinking water.
So all 3 of you, we're here at the COP, and of course there are tons of decision makers walking around in the corridors and attending meetings. From your perspective, what do you need from regulators in terms of policy changes, etc.? I'll start with you, Ole.
Well, I think in terms of regulators and policy making, already there is a lot of course, focus on carbon offsetting and regulating that market, improving and standardizing that market. I think also that I would send sort of an appeal to also look at land use in general, because we need nature, we need agricultural land, and whatever we're building out in the world of new infrastructures, cities, developments, solar farms, all kinds of great initiatives, they are also land use. So we should also think about sort of land use credits or ways to make sure that we actually offset whatever land that we consume. Most of our planet is already inhabited by us and controlled by human beings. So I think land use is something that I'd like to see. And secondly, water as well, because when we're talking about regreening, regenerating, planting trees, we need water as well. Today, more than 70% of all available freshwater resources on Earth is consumed by agriculture. And as more soil turns to sand, we need even more water just to maintain current food production and current ecosystems. So I'd also like to see some thoughts on the water scenario. I mean, when we think that a cup of coffee is more than 130 liters of water and a hamburger is more than 2,000 liters of water, we should also look at having regulations in that space and rewarding the companies who produce things with a good carbon footprint, but also a good water footprint.
Thank you very much, Ola. How about your comments from you, Vessel? What do you need from regulators?
Yeah, I really like what Beth said before us, from Patagonia, is like, it's the time to talk is over. When it comes to corporates, when it comes to government, when it comes to legislators, we are in the decade of doing. The time for the blah, 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 as Greta Thunberg so rightly said, is over. So we need to work together and we need to be honest and transparent about what we do. And we need to all make that change together. So what we would need is to stop thinking from only commercial perspective. And I know that's very difficult for the planet we live in, but I think if we look at the ecological benefits for the future generations, that's the change we really need to make. And, nature-based solutions is potentially 37% of the solution to climate change, but then also to food, to water, to migration, to biodiversity, to all of the important topics that we face. So if you look at the potential of nature-based solutions, I would say, governments and legislators should really step up to the game of nature-based solutions.
Thank you. And Martin, what's on your wish list?
On my wish list is, we know anyone that likes a good disaster movie knows that the solution has to be believable, the solution to the problem. And it also has to be, almost impossible to achieve. And also, that it has never happened that the solution wasn't found in the very last 10 minutes of the film. So I believe that we still do have time to come up with an intriguing plot twist, at least here. But in my mind, it's a no-brainer that we need carbon taxation, of course. I mean, it's just stupid that hasn't been implemented, and it's a very weak leadership from the politicians. And I also believe that we need a ban on single-use plastic, because, single-use plastic doesn't only create a lot of microplastics and garbage and vortices in our oceans, they also use up a lot of carbon dioxide, or produce it and push it out into the atmosphere when they're produced. 1 liter of bottled water needs 3 liters of safe drinking water to produce. That's also dumb. Politicians need to shape up, I think.
So Martin, from the investor perspective, what do you need?
Everyone needs money, of course. So if that answers your question. No, but we need commitment, and we need intelligent people that understand that now is the time to act. I don't want to sound like one of those echo dudes that just reiterate what everyone else is saying. But I mean, right in front of us here is a very wise bunch of good people doing what we can to change this place. And we need to collect people like them, like us. And investors need to see, and they have for quite some time, realized that this is what we need to invest in. The other stuff, please divest, and that goes also for the governments. Do not support a fossil industry. That is, as someone once said, dinosaur. So let's move on.
But thank you very much. And let's move on to a question also about the consumer perspective. When we took the train here from Sweden, we stopped at the rail station in Hamburg, and you had big bulletins. They were big screens all over the train station from Just Dig It. From a consumer perspective, and also in a way that those related to the investor question, how do you see the transformation of mindset of donors? Because you do have people, of course, participating as donors in your project, and also apart from companies investing. So do you see a mind shift here? I mean, 5 years from now, I don't think we would have seen these type of billboards or screens in the train station?
No, and it's, talking about Just Dig It, one of our key beliefs is that communication, like Sir David Attenborough said, is going to be crucial. You know, the climate crisis in its essence, we know the problems, we know the solutions, so now it's up to the communication world. And we're so happy to have many global partners like Havas and JCDecaux and Blow Up Media and others joining us, giving us all this media space for free. I'm not talking about my own organization too much, but just wanted to state that regreening is not rocket science, but the human factor complicates things. So we need to get the hearts and the hope and inspiration into the hearts and minds of people across the world that solutions do exist. But when you look at the climate thing, the narrative has been predominantly very negative, very coming from a doom and gloomish kind of scenario. So what we really believe, and not just us, together with the African Union, with the United Nations, we're working on campaigns. Actually, we have one up and running now for the COP, just to show positive impact. And I had a great conversation with Ola yesterday, and I think what Desert Control is doing and what we're doing is just, people just don't know about it enough. And that's not to promote ourselves, but just restoring nature is so low tech. And in a time where everything has to be high tech and complicated, I believe people are in dire need of solutions. So yes, I do believe that consumer-facing communication, whether it comes from brands or from NGOs like ourselves or from governments, is super important when it comes to really changing the mindset and really making this the decade of doing.
Thank you very much, Wessel. And I'm turning to Ole again before I'm going to invite Ingmar Rentzhog up on stage for some comments from our app. Ole, do you have any reflections for us?
Yeah, so I completely agree. It's really about sort of reaching the hearts and mind, and I think the consumer perspective, as Wesley is saying, is very important. It's really about creating a movement, and I think we need to also look at sort of the innovation that mankind has driven throughout the world through generations. I think the potential of people and our power to innovate and find solution is so powerful. And I think when we collaborate and we work together, we see that the power of humanity is even stronger. And if we combine that with the magic of nature and we work in alignment with nature, and we combine these three areas, the potential of people, the power of humanity, and the magic of nature, I am convinced that we can solve even the greatest threats to life on Earth. And I think we need to also bring that as a message of hope and not just a message of sort of disasters and problems and challenges, because we can actually fix this.
Well, thank you so much, and stay with us. I'm now inviting Ingmar Rentzhog up on stage to see what reflections we have from the app. And after that, I'm turning to our hub in Stockholm and then our hub in Washington, D.C. So Ingmar Rentzhog, what comments do we have on the app?
We should build back nature. That is what the conversation is all about. And what the panelists have shown is that it's possible. But people don't know about this. So it's two things people don't know about. They don't know about the sponsoring of the destruction, and they don't know about the solutions. So I'm very happy to have you all here in the panel and active on the We Don't Have Time platform, because we need to amplify what you do so that everyone will take after and do the same. We need to compete and make it profitable to save nature and make it unprofitable to destroy it. Today, the world economy operates upside down. If you want to earn money, be rich, you can destroy nature. It's easy. If you want to save nature, it's very hard, and it's much harder to make a profit out of it. We need to change that. And I think the solution to that is to share knowledge about solutions, so people know that they exist, people implement them. And I also think that we need to stop those craziness where we're actually sponsoring the bad things we have there. So we need to focus so much more on the climate lab.
Absolutely.
That is what the discussion in the app are today and often are. So if you see this, please go into the app, give climate love to the panelists, and everything you see that is doing something great.
Thank you very much, Ingmar Rentzhog. And stay with us in the panel here, because we are going to the hub in Stockholm, to Olga Grönvall, and see, she's the moderator of our hub in Stockholm, and see what questions she has and the hub has for the panelists. Hello, Olga.
Hello.
Now you're with us. Yes, you're with us now. Perfect. So hello, Olga. Finally, we get to see you and hear you. Wonderful.
Yeah, nice to see you as well. So it has been super interesting to listen to these panels above, but I had like a special aha moment when Beth from Patagonia was speaking. And when she was on this boat and saw the whale and looked into the eyes of the whale and saw this, like the infinity or the depth of the eyes, and that was her change the life moment. I think we all have to, those ones that have already had these aha moments, like I had with my dad and the hospital and the food, how I opened up my eyes for the food production. I think like all these like purpose-driven companies has to help their consumers to find the aha moments, because we are not enough as perfect consumers. We have to become active citizens as we are running out of time and have to act so extremely fast within this. And it was also extremely interesting to listen to Ole Wessel and Martin and how these people are working within their organizations or companies and about the local and resilience about their work. And I think that is going to be a big challenge now when we live on this planet that is so globalized. But it's things that we have to collaborate with, and all these purpose-driven companies, they have maybe like when they have reached this point that they can do their business as they do, they should really push the non-purpose-driven companies, because I cannot understand how those ones still exist today. And I hope that the leaders of those companies act instead of business leaders as moms and dads. So that's just like a short little summary from Stockholm.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Olga. And we're now going to see if we can get in touch with Shota Chakraborty, our representative in Washington, D.C.
Yes, hello, thank you.
Oh, wonderful to
We are live here from Washington, D.C. We're thrilled to be plugged into Glasgow and hearing these incredible panelists, following the Patagonia speaker as well. Unbelievable what's happening and what is going to continue to happen through COP26 and beyond. So reflections from Washington, D.C. are really centered around what is also happening that is monumentous concurrently to COP26, which is the Build Back Better bill that is on its way through Congress as we speak. So while President Joe Biden is in Glasgow talking to his world leaders and peers, here in Washington, D.C., Congress is attempting to pass the biggest climate investment in the United States history. And what will happen when that bill passes is an actual recommitment to correcting a history of environmental racism in the United States, which is also reflective of what we need to see on a global scale. We need to see countries that also recognize that the biggest polluters have really benefited from fossil fuels and now need to support countries that have been vulnerable and are increasingly more impacted by climate change impacts to be more resilient in the face of these impacts going forward. So that is what's going on in the United States. And it's hard to communicate the reality of all of this sometimes to different audiences. We're talking about policymakers. Katarina, you asked the panelists what the thoughts are in terms of how to communicate some of these realities to policymakers. So we see climate action urgently. How do we think about communicating to different audiences and unique audiences around the world? From those in the United States that need to support this Build Back Better agenda, so Joe Biden can feel confident about leading on the promises that the US has made to address the climate crisis, to those vulnerable citizens in countries that are being impacted by these impacts of climate change more readily than other places. So I would love to get the panelists' thoughts. And here in the DC Hub, this is what we've been talking about and engaging with the app on, is really how to communicate to these different audiences in a way that is going to result in the most action and the most impact through COP26 and beyond.
Thank you very much, Shota Chakraborty from Washington, D.C. And I think we still have the panelists with us. Who would like to start responding to Shota's question? Would you like to go, Ole?
Yeah, I think Martin had his hand up there, but I think from my perspective, it's very much in line with what I already said. I think we need to communicate a message of actual hope. I think that people do not respond to climate crisis messages anymore. So I think we need to bring solutions. I think we need to bring action. And I think, it's about demonstrating the achievements that we are making and that we are actually creating change. And change, it goes kind of like slowly in the beginning, but then suddenly when change kicks in, it becomes exponential. So I think the exponential roadmap and demonstrating how we are on the way there with actual real solutions, driving hopeful messages is my answer to the question.
Thank you, Ole. And sorry I missed you, Martin. Go ahead.
No worries. No, I agree with Ole, of course. A good message needs to connect emotionally. So that's really important. But we also now have access to a lot of data, and anything that we can measure, we can improve it. So if we can measure all the stuff that is going wrong and show the data, we can also be transparent about it. And what is it that we need to improve? Well, I totally agree with Ole there. It's about happiness, of course. It's health, hope, and the quality of life. And we need to communicate that message. And also, I need to throw in here, like I said earlier, I do believe we still have time. So, but let's not sit around and waste it. Let's do something good with it.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. And final answer from Bethell, please.
No, I think what's really important, if you look at nature-based solutions, of course, the Build Back Better bill is super important and everything like that. But if you look at nature-based solutions, it's a no-fail scenario. It's interesting to whether you're a business leader in any kind of shape or form, or a small farmer in Africa, or anybody in between. Nature-based solutions is good in every aspect. Whether you believe in climate change, I don't know if there's still people who don't, but restoring nature is the way forward. And it's such a affordable, scalable solution that everybody understands. Even my 5-year-old daughter can look at 2 pictures and say, look, the degraded land is worse than the green land. So I think putting all our efforts into restoring nature and on the one hand, supporting people like Joe Biden making this Build Back Better deal is just the way forward.
And then you can add to this that these green initiatives are green also in the color of the American dollar. So it's profitable to do green.
Absolutely.
Well, good point. Well, thank you very much, Martin, Ole, and Bethell, for joining us and sharing your important work and your insights. Thank you. And now, Ingmar, we're going to move on to the next segment. And do you have any comments on what the panel said before we do that?
The money is green, so that is what we need to work for us. I think we will get there, but before we get there, we will not solve the big challenges in the world. So we must have the money working in the right direction, and it's actually in the opposite direction. It's not just that the money is not working fast enough, it's that we're going in the wrong direction. Every hour we are here talking about billions of US dollar in the
screen,
subsidies. I mean, I may be mad talking about this like in a loop, but I'm going to continue talking about this until we're ending it. And the G20 leaders, they have again and again promised to get rid of those subsidies, but they don't do anything, and we must hold them accountable, because if we get rid of them, I believe that all the change, all the solutions will just accelerate on an exponential scale. But it's holding us back. And we can't wait. I agree with that we have time to act, but we don't have time to wait. And we don't have time to wait for our leaders to do this. We must act. So, because if the house is on fire and the leaders are not acting, we need new leaders. And we need to step up. Everyone that wants to solve the climate crisis needs to lead change.
Thank you very much, Ingmar Rentzhog. And now we move on to behavioral change, the last segment of this broadcast. And it's my pleasure to introduce, I have with me, we have several speakers, and then we move to a panel. And first of all, I'd like to introduce Sarah Klulov. She's Digital Connectivity Manager at Nottinghamshire County Council, and where she leads, she brought together a consortium for a 5G testbed in the Sherwood Forest. And this council-led project will see cutting-edge apps transform the visitor experience, including virtual reality tours. And also new robotic environmental management will be tested to monitor the health and also to preserve the Sherwood Forest. So warm welcome to you, Sarah, and the floor is yours for presentation.
Hello everyone, hello from beautiful Sherwood Forest in Nottinghamshire, home for the legend of Robin Hood.
Yes.
I am so pleased to be national voice of local authorities this evening, as we have a big role to play on how to protect our environment. So thank you for this opportunity.
You're most welcome.
During the last decades, the phrase sustainability has become very popular in the definition of utilizing energy resources. And as we heard previously, that forests mitigate carbon emission, they impact climate change, also provide livelihood, and also it is essential for sustainable food production. So to adopt this stranger approach to environmental sustainability is one of our key activities identified as part of our place departmental strategy. And as a local authority, our aim is environmentally sustainable management of our forests and woodland areas, as well as in developing the local visitor economy. Now with the 5G connected forest, we have the opportunity to make an impact on how we can sustain our environment. So Nottinghamshire County Council, in partnership with academic researchers and local businesses, is leading 10 million worth 5G testbeds to create the world's first 5G connected forest within the historic Sherwood Forest, which is one of the remaining a few natural ancient forests. It's an exciting project, and I am proud that Nottinghamshire is leading the way with these trials. So first of all, what we have seen so far within the project is technology can be used correctly to enhance everything, to enhance the forest, to enhance the visitor experience, and in the same time, look after forests if you like. Having 5G in the forest is one thing, but why we are using it and how we are using it is the main purpose. So we are using it for environmental management in two ways, by using a robot dog and also a drone. So the idea behind this is to help to capture interesting data from the forest and being able to do an intelligent processing on top of it. So we can do, for example, live detection of a person. We can also detect type of the trees, properties of the trees, such as dead woods. We can also detect the types of the trees or from the colors of the leaves, and being able to communicate this data, which is the most important part of it, via the internet, via cloud, to the stakeholders, whoever interested in, who can access in real time. So we recently unveiled a new Forest Ranger robot dog designed by experts from Birmingham City University. And this prototype remote control robot dog will help to support the management of Sherwood Forest, gathering the data from the areas which are typically inaccessible. And it is able to monitor and assess the health and the condition of the forest environment. So unlike the static camera that can only focus on one area, this dog will be able to access harder to reach areas and report back on the condition of Sherwood Forest to preserve the site for future generations. So this will be complemented by our drone and also advanced sensing technologies. So 5G enabled forestry data processing could pave a way in understanding the health of the forest, which is to provide that close to real time to ensure safe and sustainable interactions between human and the forest. So if I just cover up about, we are talking about digitalization of the forest, what we mean is, intelligent systems of sensing, monitoring, methods for analysis to be used in applications such as forest fire incidents, because forest fires are one of the causes of deforestation. And each year, because hundreds of trees are devastated each year because of forest fires in different parts of the world. So what we are trying to do is digitalization in the forest provides real-time data, real-time monitoring, and real-time forest inventory. Previously, one of the speakers mentioned really interesting facts as well, why we are doing this. As my role sits within the economic development side of it, I would like to talk very briefly on some of the facts that why we are doing this. Recent research done by PricewaterhouseCoopers UK models that the economic impact of artificial intelligence applications used in management of the environment estimates that that would contribute $5.2 trillion to the global economy, which means just over 4% of increase to the business as usual. So at the same time, which we are really interested in as well, why we are doing this in Sherwood Forest, it relates to the productivity. So artificial intelligence, AI, could create 38.2 million net new jobs across the global economy, offering more skilled occupations as part of the transition. So this is done by PricewaterhouseCoopers UK. And I would like to close off with none of these would happen without the right investment in skills. So we want to build on our successes and align our educational skill system with the business needs to aid recovery interventions and also support the businesses to access the talent needed for the next generation of our industries. So 5G Connected Forest works closely with Nottinghamshire's Digital Innovation Centre at Worksop Turbine in north of Nottinghamshire. And in recognition of the impact of these technologies that 5G enables with AR, VR, which will impact on every future area of the work, we have developed, Digital Innovation Centre developed the first skills and education program to look at the careers opportunities which 5G could bring. So this program being developed by Innovation Nottinghamshire in collaboration with local schools and colleges. So we would like to expand this, share this learning, accelerate this program to the neighboring counties. This is all why we want to do this. So I would like to close by saying we are using the technology in Nottinghamshire of the future to help look after the present and remember our past. Thank you very much.
I have a question before I let you go. How has this been received so far? Some people might not really understand the connection between high technology and nature. Sometimes they're sort of put opposed to each other. Either you love the woods or you sit and do gaming, whatnot, in your apartment. But how has this connection been received by the community?
Very, very good question, actually, because what we are trying to do in the forest is finding the art of possible. Sherwood Forest is an ancient forest. It is not even like a normal forestry area. The youngest trees are 350 years old. So we want to protect the environment. And we know that 5G has capabilities of these data collections. So how we can cover more ground by utilizing the power of 5G to protect an environment. What is the art of possible to achieve that sustainability?
So it's a beautiful marriage between nature and technology.
Yeah, we are not trying to damage the nature. We are trying to protect them by utilizing the network.
Excellent. Very, very inspiring to listen to you, Saren. Thank you for joining us here at the We Don't Have Time broadcast.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now I have two more speakers to go before we end this broadcast, and I'm very happy to introduce both of them. and they speak each after another, and then we have a panel talk together, the three of us here on stage. So, I'd like to introduce here in Glasgow, coming up on stage, Theo de Jager, who's president of the world's farmers organization, WFO. Dr. de Jager is also the former president of the South African Confederation of Agricultural Unions and the Pan-African Farmers Union. He's chairman of the board of Agri All Africa and a board member of FANRPN. He also serves on the board of Agri Limpopo, where he is responsible for land reform, transformation, farmer development, and also he's also an Africa liaison since 2004. So welcome here up on stage, and would I suggest that you remove the mouthpiece, if it's okay with you? Thank you very much. Please join me here, Dr. Jager. And the floor is yours for a presentation, and the audience is right here in front of you, the camera. And then I'll come back to you for a conversation.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Any farmers organization, no matter on which level they operate, the local ones, the national ones, the continental ones, us in the World Farmers Organization, our core function is to influence policy. We do advocacy. That's what our business is. So we engage with policymakers all the time, on every level of decision making. We are doing so to ensure that there's a policy environment that is conducive to the profitability and the sustainability of our businesses. Because agriculture is a business. If it's not a business, it's a welfare case, and we have too much of that. If you want to change behavior of farmers, you need a policy environment which allows for that. You can only change behavior of farmers if it makes business sense to them. If not, no farmer will really kill his or her business just because there is pressure from activists or NGOs or even from consumers. The real game changers in the life of a farmer is its consumers. Farmers will always do what they can sell. You want to change food systems? You start with consumers. That's why we talk about value chains in agriculture. Because you cannot push a chain, you can only pull it. And the pulling force is always that person who stands in front of shelves and shops, choosing what their family will eat tonight. So when it comes to behavioral change, if you don't start at the right point, you will not get there. In these pulling forces, it's all about competitiveness. A farmer wants to put the preferred product on that shelf in the shop. And preference has everything to do with price and with quality and with the moral or the ethical dimension of a consumer. Consumers these days, even in our neck of the woods in Africa, want to know where this food came from. How was it produced? What was sprayed on it? What kind of fertilizer was used on it? How was this pig treated before it was slaughtered? Or what was the accommodation of this chicken like before they collected the eggs? And more consumers want to scan a barcode and from that see the history of the food before it lands on the plate. Well, even beyond that, there's a lot of things that happen to food that is beyond the control of the farmer, but which impacts on the farmer. Much of the food we buy from shelves and shops is processed today. And the processor who buys it from the farmer seldom asks this kind of questions. It's the consumer usually who asks the questions. And it's only when they start asking the questions that we see that food gets wasted or lost along the chain, which has a massive impact on us in various ways. first and foremost, it contributes to climate change, and nobody is as vulnerable to climate change than the world's farmers are. We work in that climate every day. Actually, the trees, the fruit trees, which workers on my farm has planted today, will only be harvested in 7 years from now. And I don't even know whether it's the right variety for a climate in 7 years from now. How do you invest in this kind of uncertain conditions? So we need to try to get handles on the changes. We need to manage it. To manage it, we need to measure it, because what you cannot measure, you cannot manage. All of this, all of the behavioral changes of farmers in their business really start with soils. Soils is very literally at the bottom of everything we do. A farmer can make no more important investment than in the health of its soils, no matter what you farm. If you farm milk, whether you farm vegetables or fruit or cattle, it all starts with healthy soils. If every farmer could just make this choice in his life, and in World Farmers Organization we are working very hard on this, make this choice to leave this area of the planet, of which he or she is the custodian for a very short time span, to leave it in a better condition than what he or she got it in. We can really change the world in one generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please, you can stay if you'd like, or step down. I'm going to ask the next speaker to join us, and then we'll have a conversation, all three of us. With us here we have Dr. Richard Swanell, who is International Director of WRAP, Waste and Resource Action Program, WRAP. Richard is an environmental scientist with a strong track record of leading teams which tackle in respect to this panel food waste and deliver more sustainable practices within businesses. And he has just co-authored a report for the UN Environment on food waste and what to do globally. Richard works with partners in over 25 countries, and WRAP is a not-for-profit organization based in the UK, which aims to cut food waste around the world and deliver a net positive future. A warm welcome to you, Richard. Please join me and give a presentation to the camera and to the people present here at the COP. And I'll step down, and then I'll come back up again for conversation.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. It's my privilege actually to follow Thiaw and actually also build on what he's just said in terms of the importance of food loss and waste. So what I'm going to tell you about a little bit in the next 5 minutes or so is what is the scale of food loss and waste on the planet? What is this research that you referred to? What does that tell us? And what is the causes and what can we do about it? So let's talk about the scale of it first of all. For every 2 tons of food produced on the planet, 1 ton is wasted. So around 1/3 of everything that's produced on the planet is wasted. It's over 1 billion tons of food every single year. Now, when you talk about those big statistics, it's hard to get your head around them. So let's just talk about them in a bit different way. You need an area the size of China to grow the food that we throw away every single year. That's huge. And that has a huge environmental effect. The environmental effect, for example, 8 to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions are actually related to food loss and waste. So what does that mean? It means that if food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd largest emitter on the planet, behind China and the USA. And this has a vast cost. The economic cost is $1 trillion more every single year. So this is a massive issue, an absolutely huge issue. And the critical thing is, we don't realize that link between food waste and climate change. Food waste feeds climate change. So where does food loss and waste occur? Well, the answer is it occurs from farm gate all the way through to the home, right across the whole supply chain. And to give you an idea, across the whole of the EU, around a half of all the food that is produced, that is wasted, I beg your pardon, is wasted in the home. And the amount varies country to country depending on how much local production there is. But interestingly, I mean, to give you another example, the UK, where we are today, 70% of all the food waste post-farm gate is in the home. To give you an idea of the sheer scale of this. And recent research that we've done with UNEP, we co-authored with UNEP, has shown that this problem is a global problem. So in high-income countries and middle-income countries, we find that virtually the same amount of food waste, around 80 kilograms per person per year. Now again, what does that mean? That means more than the average human body weight is thrown away by us all every single year. So this is huge. So what can we do about it? Well, if you're a business listening to this, the thing you can do about it is three things: target, measure, act. Set yourself a clear target. The UN Sustainable Development Goal is halving food loss and waste by 2030. That's a great target to go for. Set that. That would help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Measure the amount of food waste you produce. Not enough companies around the world are measuring. If you measure, you can then act upon it, and then act to reduce the food loss and waste in your own operations, and then also help your suppliers and your customers reduce food loss and waste. And in the home, what can we all do about this in the home? Well, two key things: buy what you need and eat what you buy. Really simple, straightforward things. But if we all did this every single day, those small differences would have a big impact and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Richard. Let's have a little panel talk here, and let's see if we can connect with some of our, one or two of our hubs for some input too. I'll start with some questions from my side. In terms of shifting government's roles, I'm turning to you first. How do you look on farmers and their role in climate change and climate action? How do we shift the perspective of governments on a global scale? Here we're meeting here at the COP to talk about, and of course farmers play a big role in this. What hopes do you have? What will happen here at the COP, and how can this be perspective be shifted so we really realize the potential that lies in the hands of the farmers?
If I can put on my selfish hat as a farmer, and not speak for the global good, but for the farmers' good. We are very frustrated with the shallow horizon of policymakers. Governments usually get elected and they stay in power for 4 or 5 years, and in that time span they try to do what would be good for them, whilst farmers must always have a much longer vision. As I said, you plant trees which you will only harvest often in 7 or 8 years from now. So we are trying to push policymakers to have a broader horizon, to plan much longer than their own tenure in a position of power. But more than that, it's very important for us that governments talk to each other. You know, climate change and issues such as food loss and waste does not recognize international boundaries. No use one country does everything right, but the rest of the countries around it does it all wrong. It is important that we have a broader strategy than just a national strategy. At least we must work in regions or continents, best of all probably in terms of the whole world. And then it's important to keep them to their commitments.
Thank you very much for a strong message here. Of course, the horizon is different from different countries, and we need to really stretch it overall, globally, to make it possible for you to plan.
Absolutely.
And Richard, in terms of mind shift, behavioral change, what do you need from policymakers to help what you're doing in looking at food waste?
I think the key thing is to prioritize food loss and waste reduction. As we said, 8 to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions comes from food loss and waste. That's a huge amount. If it was a country, the third biggest emitter on the planet, just to re-emphasize that point. So if policymakers actually prioritize this, There's a huge amount of cost savings for businesses, for farmers, for the suppliers going right through the supply chain, and for us as citizens. We could all save a lot of money, but we could also reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And I think the critical thing is by putting that at the center of policies, there are proven methods that would help us all change behavior and reduce food loss and waste right across the supply chain that could be implemented.
Before I turn to Stockholm, because they're now connected, I can hear that. What do you need? I mean, we talked about policymakers here, but from other actors in society, from your perspective, what do you need to speed up the connection between what you're working with and climate action, sorry?
We need closer liaison when it comes to action around these issues. It is not only a government function, and there's nothing civil society can do without government, so we need better connectedness and better understanding of each other. We need better teamwork. Secondly, when we talk about food loss and waste, what farmers hear is financial loss and waste, because somebody paid for it, even if it ends up in a landfill, and it's very often us. We need special financing mechanisms and the repurposing of subsidies to get to where we need to be.
Instead of subsidies like this, the fossil fuel subsidies we might take a look at, of course, in relation to this field too.
Exactly. To reduce food loss and waste with 50% is going to cost us something. And that funding can not only go to governments, it's not governments who are doing the wasting. It must trickle down to the real origin of it.
Thank you. And Richard, from your perspective, what do you need apart from policymakers?
Well, we need partnerships right across the supply chain. I'm very struck by what Thiaw just said there about teamwork. What we've really found works to tackle food loss and waste is by getting businesses together with government and with civil society organisations to work together towards a common goal of reducing food loss and waste. So we have a voluntary agreement here in the UK called the Court-Old Commitment that has about 85% of all market share of food sold in the UK. And by working with that and a Love Food, Hate Waste, our behaviour change campaign, what we've managed to do is help reduce food loss and waste across the supply chain by 27%. So this partnership working can really drive significant change. And so therefore, I think encouraging that teamwork around the world can really help.
I very recently, actually last week, moderated a food and climate seminar in Sweden, where I'm from. And one of the representatives from the farmers said, the closer a relationship we get with the farmers, the less food we will waste. Because we will respect the food and the products better if we know the origins of it. You spoke about this earlier. And he said we should all go out and create connections with the local farmers. And he even said you should hug the farmers, literally not hugging them, maybe still in the pandemic, but get a relationship and respect the people that has actually produced what we eat. How does that resonate with you?
See, to reduce food loss and waste, we need to employ a circular economy. And a circular economy, it looks like a wheel. A wheel can only take you forward if it touches the ground every now and then, and that ground is the farm. It comes back to the farm, whether in the form of animal feed or compost, or it lands in a biodigester, but it comes back to the farm somehow. Hence, the farmers is a vital link in the circular economy to solve food loss and waste.
Well, thank you very much. Let's now turn to Stockholm and see what reflections or comments we have from Olga Grönvall, the moderator of the Stockholm Hub. Let's see. Yes, we still with Stockholm, and then we turn to Washington.
So the idea, I think, is so interesting to hear the purpose of having an interest organization, or it's actually very sad that we have to push policies, because I actually think that the political leaders should act themselves, that should not be so many economic interests involved in this. And if we look at what Richard said about the food loss and waste, I think it's extremely weird that we have created a system where food loss and waste is existing on the same planet as people are dying every day about from not having enough with food. So then it comes up to another question, is this really a democratic system we have created? And how come that is not more based on science science and also moral and a more ethnical side? So Katarina, what do you think? Do you think we really have a democratic system?
Were you asking me, or I think I should turn to the question to the specialists here. Who would like to ask?
You can bounce it.
Yes, I'm bouncing it. Yes.
Can I take the first bite at the apple? There's enough food in the world. If it was not so, we would not have wasted a third of it. The food is not where the people are hungry. And it simply costs too much to get it where they are hungry. It is still cheaper to bring a container of maize down the Mississippi and across the Atlantic to Cape Town Harbour than what it is to take it from Cape Town to Harare. There's something terribly wrong in our value chain. And the only ones who can fix it are the policy makers. That's why we need to start influencing the policy makers.
And that's why you're here today. Well, we're happy you are indeed pushing for this. So Richard, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I think this is a really fundamental point. Why are we wasting? I mean, this is the whole point. Why are we wasting so much down the supply chain? And this goes right the way through the system. And in part, there are a number of answers, exactly telling what you said, in terms of people, when people throw food away, they don't see the true cost of it. They just think this is the cost of disposal. That's the bill I get every month. And putting it into landfill where it degrades and actually produces more greenhouse gas emissions like methane. But at the heart of it, why, is because we're not measuring the right thing. The total value of what we throw away is what we should measure. And when businesses do that, they suddenly go, this is an enormous amount of stuff we're throwing away. And the other critical bit is we don't measure it. And of course, any supply chain, if you don't measure things, you can't manage them. And as soon as businesses start measuring them, then it makes a difference. And even in our homes, if we have separate collection of food waste, we've shown that showing people the consequences of our normal behavior, because most people don't think they throw food away. When you see it, you think, maybe I do. Maybe I can do something about it. That is a way of driving change.
So more of the measuring part, indeed. Let's turn to Washington now and see if we get a question or comment from Shuta Chakraborty in Washington.
Yes.
Hello, Shuta.
Thank you. We do have a question here that's unique to the US. So we know that in Western countries, most of the food waste is at the consumer part of the supply chain, whereas in more developing countries, it's at the source of the supply chain. But here in the West and in the United States, we're curious as to how we can reduce that waste at that consumer decision-making point. And we're here in Washington, D.C., just a stone's throw or a train ride, Amtrak ride from New York City, where a famous chef, Dan Barber, is known for creating what he has referred to as wasted. It's the scraps of food that you would normally throw out, but he created an actual cuisine that showcases wasted food, and it makes it a gourmet ticket that is exclusive. It's an experience that people want to actually pay the same amount that they would pay for a gourmet meal. So it's a actual different way of thinking about food and food waste. How do we think about that, especially for the West and especially for consumers that are not necessarily thinking about food waste and are absent-minded in terms of how they engage with food? Maybe actually changing the narrative and thinking about food waste as garbage chic or something equivalent can go a long way. Would love to hear the panelists' thoughts.
Thank you very much, Jutta. I think I'm going to hand this over to Richard.
I love the concept of garbage chic. I mean, what a way of thinking about it. But if I'm really honest, I think the critical thing is we've got to value food and all of the food that we get. And the interesting thing is when we first started work here in the UK, we asked people, do you waste food? And if so, how much do you think you waste? 90% of people said they don't waste food. It's a hidden problem because you don't know you're doing it. It's just got into our normal ways of doing it. And so what we need to do is not, I garbage chic on one side, yes, if it changes the narrative, yes, but actually we need to change things every day in what we're doing in our homes. You know, we ought to buy what we need. So make a shopping list, do a shelfie, take a photograph of what's in your
Shelfie.
In your cupboards or in your fridges, so that you know what it is. Store things properly so they don't go off fast. Store them in the fridge where you need to, or in the dark where you need to. Get your portions right. You know, you get the portions right, then you don't have food at the end left on your plate. And if you don't get them right, use your leftovers. That's all of these things. And remember, your freezer is your friend in helping you deal with this. So frankly, this is, and when I talk about this, I often think, if you go back through human history, we have historically been brilliant at managing food. It's been at the heart of our cultures.
Survival skill.
So let's upskill again and do it for the 21st century. Value food and don't throw it away.
Thank you, Richard. Would you like to comment before we conclude?
There was the reference also in the developing countries where food loss and waste happens closer to the farm gate. It's of course because of a lack of infrastructure. Much of our products need to maintain the cold chain up to the consumers, and in our neck of the woods in Africa it is simply not there, it's non-existent. Actually, Africa, my home continent, has got everything that money cannot buy when it comes to agriculture. The soils, the water, the wonderful climate, the people. What it needs can be brought about through investments. And investment only comes when there is an environment which is friendly towards investors. And this is what we need to create.
Well, best of luck with your important work here at the COP and onwards, both of you. Thank you very much for joining and sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'd like you to step down a little bit because we need to conclude. And thank you again, both of you. Thank you. So, all right, Ingmar Rentzhog, would you like to join me? Let's just talk a little bit about what's happening on the app after all this important input.
Actually, I have an own thing I would like to post in the app right after I'm publish it here live. As I explained before, if you see something you don't like, you give climate warning that needs to stop. If you see something that is good, a solution, you give it climate love. But we also have this idea. So if you see something that we should do in a totally new way, it's not that we're doing it wrong today, it's just that we could do it in a new way. You could give an idea, a climate idea. And my idea is very simple. We will throw away food as long as food is cheap and as long as it costs nothing to throw it away. People will change instantly if they cost them money to throw away food, or if food is more expensive. You don't throw away Russian caviar. You don't throw away luxury food, but you throw away what is cheap. So we need to produce food in a much better way, and I think food needs to cost more money. Of course, we need to provide food with all people on this planet. We have to give them money. Use this money to end hunger in the whole world. That's the money we need. And we need to make it expensive to throw away food in the value chain and at home. It should cost money to waste resources. That's the solution. It's a really simple solution. It works.
Thank you very much, Ingmar Rentzhog. And please stay with me here up on stage. I'm going to invite also up on stage Mats Pellback-Sharp, who is Head of Sustainability at Ericsson. Lovely to see you here, Mats. Please join me. And also welcome back up on stage Johan Falk from Exponential Roadmap Initiative. And you've been listening in here today. Ingmar, of course, been up and down off stage. And I'd like to start turning to you, Mats. Which has been your main takeaways from this broadcast on food and nature solutions?
I think that, one of the key reflections is that we have been focused so much on industries. So I think we have in some way forgotten about the whole food and nature-based solutions. I think it's sort of not highlighted enough. So from my perspective, I think the whole session has been fantastic, super interesting, and I also learned a new word today. agripreneurs. It's like not even Apple knew it, so it must be a new word.
And I learned shelfie. I thought that was
great,
wonderful.
yeah.
Yes.
So and then I think, of course, I mean, I have to say, I think that digitalization really, it's an opportunity for small scale, because I mean, remember the music industry. 5 companies ruled the world. Now everybody can afford their studio. It's the same for the food and the farmers. Smallhold can reach the market, can produce in a totally different way. So I think digitalization opens so much opportunities for a more democratic way of driving things. So I think that is something that we need to think about and for the future as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mats. And Johan, your reflections? And I realize I don't need these any longer. Here you go.
Yeah. First, I'd like to say that this number made me very angry. You know, if we could use that money to, you know, save climate, save nature, save humanity instead of destroying it. Think about that. And we should also think that this doesn't happen automatically. It's basically people that are taking decisions to destroy the planet. And I think it's time to call them out, basically.
Call them out.
It's time to call them out. I just want to mention that. But I think it was a fantastic session. I think the link between climate and nature is so obvious, and it's been underestimated because we talked a lot about the energy transformation, as we mentioned about. I think that the need of very, very strong innovation. We saw a lot of incredible innovation here, but it's also to show these positive examples that we talked about and help to scale them exponentially. That will be so incredibly important, because a lot of these solutions are not sufficiently known. Radical collaboration, I think, as well. I think we need to work through the value chains all the way from the consumption side, where people actually start to take better decisions, all the way down to the farmer who wants to become a climate leader, but need to have the financial opportunities to actually do that. If you can tie these value chains together, I think that can transform things very, very quickly. And I think it's time, what also Patagonia said, the time for blah, blah, blah is over, basically. You know, companies need to be honest, they need to cut emissions according to science, and they need to align their strategy with climate and nature, and the rest of the companies just have to go, as far as I see it.
Thank you very much, Johan Falk. And Mats Pellbeck-Sharp, your call to action after having watched and followed this broadcast today, and in general in this section of your approach.
I think one of the most important pieces is really Kiss the Ground 2. We have to see that movie. And then I also think that we heard about EasyMining. I mean, we cannot have legislation stopping good ideas that really helps us put things into circularity. So I think in general, to have regulations that support the things that are good. I mean, here we see the fossil fuel, and we have talked about it a lot, I think, so I don't need to re-mention that, but I think then finally, of course, Sherwood Forest. I'm so happy for Robin Hood. It's saved by 5G, of course. I mean,
it's a good story.
That has to go as my sort of final remark. Saving Sherwood Forest and Robin Hood's hoods for with 5G, I think that is really a good one.
It's a beautiful aspect, beautiful story. So Ingmar, before we say good night and goodbye, could you give us an update on the Don't Choose Extinction campaign?
Yes, so we have $23 billion sponsoring the fossil fuel industry since yesterday. And it's going to be very interesting to see how big this number is when these talks are over. And as Johan said, this is not nature, this is humans deciding to do it willingly. And I think that if enough people knows about this and demand it to stop, it will stop. But I will also say, this is $5.9 trillion per year, is almost 6% of the global GDP, And to demand and ask that this needs to change is something that really powerful interests don't want to happen. I'm so glad that the United Nations are now taking this to everywhere and partnering up with hundreds of organizations, including ours, to amplify this message, because you can silence one individual, you can silence one organization, 10 organizations, but you can't silence everyone, even if those interests are trying their best to do that. And that's absurd. But we will not let them do that. We will end that fossil fuel subsidies. This is going to end. And you all can help it happen. Talk about this. We have made this counter. You could share it from the site. We will mail it to everyone that has watched here today. Please spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingmar Rentzhog, and also go in and watch the movie Freddy the Dinosaur and spread it, because it's a powerful message with this dinosaur in the General Assembly of the United Nations. Well, thank you very much, Johan Falk and Mats Perlbäck-Sharp, for joining us here and for your input, and of course Ingmar Rentzhog. And tomorrow, all of you following us, please stay tuned, because we have the second Exponential Climate Action broadcast. Yes, Ingmar?
Could I say one last thing?
Yes, go ahead.
I want to credit the organizers of this COP meeting, because they are actually serving food that is mostly from the region, mostly plant-based, and tastes very good. And I think that's important, because what everyone is eating is influence their decisions. So I want to thank the organizers for the COP for thinking of serving better food for the planet and for the negotiations to succeed here in COP.
Good point. Yes, we had good lunch and good snacks here during the broadcast. So tomorrow, let's meet again for the second Exponential Climate Action Summit here at the COP, and we will talk tomorrow about industry and buildings. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for viewing.
Bye.
And thank you again. Bye-bye.
A distant sound, closer, soon it's all around. Heal me, time is running out. Come on, tell them what it's all about. We're running out of time, we're running out of air. We gotta keep it clean, show me that you care. Wherever you are, you got to wake up. United as a nation. There's a world to say, right or wrong, how will you behave? Do the right thing, as they used to say, more than ever, that is true today. Be part of the solution, switch it up, for future generations, level up. If our planet dies, how will you console me?